Hey guys, tonight we drift through lamplight and lacquered doors, the air warm with rosewater and charcoal, while the marble under your bare feet holds the day's heat like a kept secret. You move softly past silk screens and whispering courtyards, following a trail that isn't chalk or breadcrumbs, but choices, letters, gifts, buildings, marriages laid down by one woman whose name still hums across continents. Hurrem. You probably won't survive this palace on 4 hours of sleep and 1 cup of sherbet. But don't worry, we're here to float, not to fight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you are and what the clock says beside your bed. I love seeing our little night map light up with cities and times. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slip into the story already in motion, as if you find yourself mid-corridor with the eunuch guards behind you and a carved door ahead. The door opens, and what steps through history is a pattern, a young woman taken as a captive, remade by the palace school. And then, this is the mainstream fact. Formally married to Sultan Suleiman in a ceremony so unusual for an Ottoman ruler that it ripples through court etiquette like a dropped pearl. You feel the ripple beneath your toes. Hürrem becomes Hürrem Sultan, the favored consort elevated into something new, and the room suddenly rearranges around her. Pillows shift, poets sharpen their pens, and bureaucrats pretend they weren't listening. You, by the way, are doing great breathing, blinking, and resisting the urge to reorganize her spice cabinet. That comes later. You are not here to memorize dates like you're in a marble-floored quiz show. You are here to watch how power behaves when it puts on velvet slippers. You stand near a lattice and feel diplomacy pass by in the form of a folded note, perfumed faintly with amber and mastica slipping from sleeve to sleeve. That's how she works often. Quiet paper, sure hands. The palace at night is a web: scribes, messengers, stewards, and the long patience of people who know that an hour in the right corridor is worth a month anywhere else. If you've ever waited for a text and watched those 3 dots dance like a tiny drum solo in your chest, welcome to the 16th century. Same heartbeat, different notification tone. Joke 1. It's fine, the Janissaries will rate it a respectable hum. You lean on a window frame and look out at a city that still breathes today. Somewhere under your fingertips, mason's marks sit on stones paid for by her endowments, and kitchens simmered for the poor long after her voice was gone. But we're not getting ahead. Tonight we are tracing footprints, not sprinting down the causeway. The first prints are soft, a laugh in a language she learned newly, a letter to the Sultan teasing, and wise a gift that is more than a gift. There's a quirky tidbit tucked in here, some court gossip claims. She liked to play backgammon with Suleiman late into the night, wagering not coins but favors. A petition reviewed. A craftsman recommended. A sick widow remembered. Is it provable? The game board in the treasury has no speech bubbles, but the rumor has endurance like a faint perfume that clings to velvet. You are careful with rumors. You keep your balance on the line between story and stone. Historians still argue whether Hurrem orchestrates the fall of the Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, or whether she simply becomes the convenient face for currents already roiling beneath the court's polished surface. You watch the debate the way you would watch shadow play on a silk screen, lions and hunters, all suggestion. The important thing for your pulse tonight is the shape of the legacy, how influence becomes habit, and how habit becomes heritage. So you follow the hallway to its practical end: kitchens, baths and ledgers. If the first part of her power is proximity, the second is permanence. She leverages the title Hasaki, not just to sit closer to the throne, but to build things that outlast anyone's temper. Soup kitchens that ladle out stews on cold mornings, baths that turn steam into health and gossip into community, hospitals that coin mercy into routine. It's not flashy, it's logistics. You feel a quiet admiration sneak up on you like a cat that decided you are a suitable couch. And yes, there's a pinch of gentle sarcasm in the air. The palace is a masterclass in turning generosity into public relations without admitting it owns a PR department. Joke 2, if PR had a fez, it would be hanging on a peg right here. Your steps are small and deliberate, like a bedtime ritual that includes checking the door twice and the candle once. You run a finger along a calligraphic panel, and taste don't actually lick. The panel security will have words, the philosophy of giving that threads through her endowments. The WAC system, legal and enduring, converts wealth into ongoing services. This is the place where a loaf of bread isn't just a loaf. It is policy. You stand in the doorway of a kitchen and smell lentils, onions, cinnamon, and a future we'll visit in detail soon. The cook notices you, nods, and keeps stirring. You feel the reliability of it in a world of court fevers and rumors with teeth. The pot keeps bubbling. You pivot back to the private rooms where letters are composed. In the pool of lamplight, a scribe sands the ink. The letter's voice is direct, playful, careful praise for campaigns, a concern for a neighborhood, a suggestion wrapped in a smile. The mainstream fact folds here again. Several letters in her voice survive, and whether every flourish was hers or polished by a chancery hand, the mix of affection and policy is distinct. She writes as someone who belongs in the conversation. You recognize the modern echo, the email that's both warm and wildly effective, the message that says, "Hope you're well," and attaches 3 bullet points that quietly rearrange the meeting. Joke 3 somewhere. An Ottoman clerk invents the CC line by walking a copy to the next room. You pass a niche holding a string of beads, and for a moment you count them not as prayers but as steps in a plan. Power skips like a stone across water, one circle, then the next, then another. First, the inner chamber, then the women's network, then the city, then beyond. The palace is not a single stage, but a nested set of rooms. Hurrem learns them, paces them, and leaves them with tiny changes that add up. The angle of a curtain alters who overhears. The seating at a festival changes who feels seen. The sequence of petitions sets the tempo of mercy. Later we'll walk every one of these choices more slowly, as if they were garden paths in the cool just before dawn. For now you breathe, and the fan hum, real or imagined, settles you. Remember this rhythm. A person becomes a pattern becomes a legacy. People will argue the exact boundaries of that pattern they already do, but when you step out into modern streets and see a hospital named for her, a bathhouse restored, or a television series that turns her into dialogue and diamonds, you feel how the pattern survives in the strangest ways. Even the mispronunciations, Roxolana rolling around foreign mouths, are evidence of survival. Names mutate, footprints stay. You reach the end of the corridor and rest your palm on a column that keeps standing even when the room empties. You listen to the night outside, sellers folding their stalls, water tapping through channels, the city yawning. The work here is not the thunderclap, but the steady drip. You will follow it from this palace to kitchens in Jerusalem, to ledger lines that feed 100 hands, to stories retold in Paris salons and on streaming screens. For tonight's first step, it's enough to know that the door we opened did not close when she did. It stayed ajar, and the breeze that runs through it reaches you where you lie, blanket tucked, just so, phone on night mode, mind loosening its fist. Keep that image. We'll need it when we start mapping how a woman's choices become a city's habits, and just maybe yours. You follow the footprint back to its first clear print, a girl lifted from the borderlands and carried east like a seed in someone else's pocket. She enters the palace not as a guest, but as property, and you stand with her on the threshold of the women's quarters, where language changes are as thick as carpets. Ukrainian or Ruthenian tones sanded into Ottoman Turkish vowels, her baptismal name shed for a new one, Hürrem the Cheerful. That nickname, you notice, is a survival strategy as much as a mood. Laughter in a competitive room is like oil on hinges. It keeps doors moving. The mainstream fact anchors you within years. She becomes Hürrem Sultan, the Sultan's favored consort, and unusually, his legal wife, a formal marriage that startles the court and signs a new chapter in palace rules. You move with her through the curriculum. Every concubine learns sewing that is really social mapping, music that is really listening practice, scripture that is really diplomacy with the soul. Her teachers adjust her posture and her draftsmanship. She adjusts her chances. When you watch her pour sherbet for a higher-ranking woman, you see speed and soft hands, but you also see pattern recognition. Who eats what, who delays before sipping, who pretends not to have heard a name. This is data 16th century style, and she becomes excellent at collecting it without looking like she's collecting it. Light joke 1. If palace points were real, she'd be platinum elite by spring free towel upgrade included. There's a quirky tidbit. You can't resist chroniclers and gossips. Say she laughs easily, teasing Suleiman with clever turns, sometimes composing verses back at him because yes, he writes poetry under the pen name Muhibbi. Is every couplet exactly hers? The chancery touches many papers before they reach daylight, but the habit of fast wit around a serious man is consistent in the record and the rumor. Humor here is insulation. It softens the shock of a decision before it lands. It ventilates a room where everyone forgets to breathe. You track the steps that take her from captive to catalyst. First, she learns the rhythm of the harem, where rank is measured in distance to the Valid Sultan and the Sultan's glance. Second, she solves the puzzle of attention not with a single spectacular act, but with reliable small ones. Timely counsel, domestic ease, a steady emotional temperature. You've seen this in your own life, maybe the coworker who never brings fireworks to a meeting, but always brings the right plug adapter. At some point, everyone else realizes they can't function without her. Light joke 2 somewhere, a vizier invents the Where's Hurrem Slack channel, but it's mostly fruitless because she's already in the room you forgot existed. The transformation you feel under your fingertips is legal as much as emotional. The mainstream point again, marriage. Ottoman sultans before Suleiman generally avoided legal marriage to concubines to keep alliances fluid and succession options open. When Suleiman marries Hurrem, he marks her not only as favored, but as legitimate wife, which re-scripts the etiquette of seating audiences, gifts, and childbirth celebration. You watch palace protocol rearrange itself like chess pieces that suddenly realize the queen has learned to move like a knight too. Historians still argue whether the marriage was primarily a matter of personal devotion, calculated politics, or religious piety. One of those yes and answers that scholarship loves and certainty hates. You lean closer to the lattice when the first child is born, then the next Mihrimah's arrival brings a new kind of leverage because a daughter in this world is a bridge. Through her alliances are woven. Through her the mother's influence crosses courtyards. When Selim is born, the future Selim II, you see the succession story begin to draw itself in nervous ink. The air sharpens. The mothers of princes know that the empire's future is a cradle with 1,000 hands. Hürrem's path from captive to catalyst tightens here. To protect her children, she must become a policy, not just a person. You notice how she frames requests, how frequently she steers them toward mercy. Petitioners, widows, craftsmen, the poor benefit from her reputation as the ear that hears and the hand that steadies. The room learns a new reflex. Send it to Hurrem. The harem, so often imagined as leisure, reveals itself to you as logistics. She writes letters when Suleiman is on campaign praising victories while also slipping in updates about fires, prices, and repairs, because someone must be the city's memory when the army sleeps under stars. Light joke 3, call it the original, while you were out sticky note, except with better calligraphy and slightly higher stakes than refilling the printer toner. And yet you are careful. Warmth is not weakness and laughter is not naivete. You stand at the edge of rumor about a feud with another consort, Mahidevran, and you keep your balance. Was there a physical altercation? Did scratches and anger tilt the domestic axis? Historians still argue whether the famous quarrel is amplified theater or foundational truth. You mark it as a sign that narratives harden around emotional scenes even when archives stay quiet. What matters for the legacy you're tracing is that Hurrem learns to convert private storms into public architecture, literally and figuratively. She builds a life that produces food, medicine, and ritual comfort, and she builds a persona that produces continuity. The palace school gives her tools. She returns improved machines. Consider the way she calibrates festivals, which charities to highlight, which guilds to honor, which musicians to feature. Consider how gifts move furs and jewels outward, information inward. Even the choice of fabrics speaks in a language you're learning to read. Bursa silk in sober tones says stability. Bright embroidery says joy without threat. A detail you enjoy, some inventories mention scent wardrobes, little arsenals of ambergris, rose and musk. You imagine her selecting not only a dress for the day, but an aroma strategy, which fragrance pairs with which message. It's a playful thought, but in a world without microphones, smell is a kind of microphone. The catalyst crystallizes when she begins to commission buildings. You'll walk them in detail soon, but feel the hinge here. The Waqf documents bear her mark, converting personal wealth into institutional routine. What once depended on her closeness to power will after her depend on paperwork that keeps running while politics tosses and turns. The lesson is deceptively simple. If you want empathy to survive, give it a schedule. Soup at dawn, bread at noon, night watch funded, lamps lit. Even a casual passerby centuries later, maybe you, maybe tomorrow, catches the warmth. You trace one more loop, how her ascent reframes image. Before Hurrem, the ideal of a sultan's household leans toward the invisible woman who bears sons and remains a name in a ledger. After Hurrem, visibility itself becomes part of the Ottoman conversation about female virtue and power. Portraits, miniatures, and European travelogues begin to place her at the center of stories, sometimes worshipped, sometimes warned against. The Western renaming Roxolana, meaning the girl from the Ruthenian lands, is both mispronunciation and myth-making, a way outsiders make her fit their theater. You don't mind the costume change, you just note it as you might note a modern biopic that upgrades lighting but downgrades nuance. By the time you return to the doorway where we began, you realize the path from captive to catalyst is not a straight corridor. It's a series of rooms you re-enter with better eyes: training, affection, legal status, motherhood policy, public works. Each room teaches a different verb: learn, charm, legalize, protect, build symbol. And she conjugates them until they become habit for the people around her. That's a legacy you can feel without footnotes, the way a city grows used to mercy being possible, the way a court grows used to a woman being audible, the way a story grows used to a smile being strategy. You exhale. The night thickens. In the next rooms, you'll sense how this new pattern hardens into the broader era people call the Sultanate of Women, but for now, let your shoulders drop with the knowledge that ascendancy can be more than a throne. Sometimes, as you've just watched, it's a posture, a payroll, and a laugh that refuses to be an apology. You stand at the hinge where one woman's choices start to feel like furniture built in, expected, sat upon by people who forget there was a time before chairs. The corridor ahead widens and you watch doors that used to swing only one way begin to learn a second motion. That soft mechanical click you hear, it's the Sultanate of Women falling into place, not a coronation but a calibration. The mainstream fact steadies your step from roughly the mid-16th to the mid-17th century. The imperial harems leading women Hurrem, first in pattern, later valide sultans like Nurbanu Safiye and Kusum shape policy. Personnel and public works sometimes acting as regents when a sultan is too young or absent. The empire doesn't announce this shift with trumpets. It whispers it into routines. You move through the women's apartments and feel the hierarchy warm under your palm like a sleeping cat at the top. The valid sultan, the sultan's mother whose stipend, seal, and separate household turn influence into office. Hurrem will never be valide. She dies before her son Selim inherits, and you slide that into your pocket as a quiet but important truth. Yet her life redraws the floor plan all the same. She normalizes a visible consort with public works and correspondence. Then a generation later, the mothers of reigning sultans step into a space whose lights she helped wire. Light joke 1. The empire's HR department basically moves into the harem and starts wearing kaftans. Onboarding now includes scent selection and a minor in crisis management. You pause at a lattice over the second courtyard. The breeze carries the mixed scent of ink and cardamom. Down there, the chief black eunuch, Kuzlar Arsi, mediates between inner and outer palace, a human hinge whose power grows alongside the women he serves. You picture memo trails that run from a widow's petition to a treasurer's ledger to the valid's seal, then back out to the grand vizier's desk, then to the janissary payroll, then to the bakery that makes the bread that keeps the widows steady. It's not glamorous, but you watch the empire breathe through paperwork. Remember that soup kitchen you visited. In this era, kitchens become policy tools with a rhythm you can set a city's clock by. There's a quirky tidbit that glints like a fish in the Bosphorus. The Valide Sultan maintains her own imperial barge, a gilded vessel for processions and pilgrimages that lets a woman who rarely appears in public still move through the Proust city's artery of water with unmistakable presence. Imagine the quiet shock of seeing a curtain shift as the barge glides past a ripple, saying the mother of the Sultan is watching. Meanwhile, up here, delicate golden screens Gurishlook let women observe ceremonies without being seen, a choreography of presence and absence that you feel in your shoulder blades. Visibility, you realize, can be a set of options, not a single switch. You step into a small office where a steward counts coins and a secretary counts favors. You remember Hurrem's habit of turning affection into logistics letters that praise and petition, at once festivals that advertise generosity like lanterns along a path. Now the path is broader. The Valids' apartments have their own doorway for petitioners, their own treasurer, their own craft workshops. The silk from Bursa hums in careful stacks. The scent wardrobe is now a warehouse. Light joke too, if there were loyalty points for Wakf donations, this era would unlock the free bath token plus upgraded soup ladle tier. Historians still argue whether Sultanate of Women is the right label. Does it exaggerate, romanticize, or accurately describe a redistribution of palace authority? You keep the debate tucked like a note in your sleeve. From where you stand tonight, you observe something simpler. Habits become institutions. The Women's Council is no longer a soft suggestion at twilight. It shows up on payrolls, in building contracts, in letters with seals that command rather than coax. The Hurrem staircase is not a ladder behind the throne. It's a ramp that staff and clerics learn to walk daily. You trace a line from Hurrem's living presence to the policies of those who follow. Nurbanu, mother of Murad III, becomes Valide in 1574 and keeps networks humming that reach Venice and beyond. Safiye inherits not just rooms, but a playbook, patronage, diplomacy, selective visibility. Kozum later will hold regency more than once, a fact that makes the marble under your feet feel sturdier than rumor. You notice the recurrence endowments for kitchens and schools, stipends for scholars, maintenance funds for lamps and fountains. Mercy is professionalized, which sounds unromantic until you remember the steadiness of a pot that boils at the same hour every day. You wander past a shelf of sealed boxes labeled with neat hands: dowry fund, hospital repairs, poorhouse oil. Each box smells faintly of cedar. Inside, the Wakf deeds fold their wings like patient birds. Someone, many someones, must keep those wings oiled. The women's households employ clerks, accountants, purchasers, inspectors, and craftswomen. The palace becomes a training ground for a particular kind of competence, the ability to stretch tenderness across a city map. It's like watching a love letter become a spreadsheet, then a streetlight. Light joke 3, if you've ever turned a feelings journal into a color-coded budgeting app, congratulations, you and the Valide share a hobby. You feel a historical breeze run backward too. The household is not merely a women's space. It is a political instrument. Who controls access controls timing. Who controls timing controls outcomes. A festival delayed is a grievance averted. A rumor redirected is a crisis that never hatches. You remember that earlier backgammon rumor and smile, little wagers for larger effects. In this era, those wagers become scheduled, giving strategic marriages and ceremonial seating plans that function like chess openings. Seats are policy. Suites are policy. Even the order of procession is policy. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Still, the story doesn't smooth into a fairy tale. You hear the friction, janissary unrest, palace intrigues, foreign wars, prices that don't behave. The women's authority never floats free of the empire's storms. Instead, it becomes rain gear. Sometimes it leaks. Historians still argue whether particular dismissals, appointments, or execution orders trace directly to a Valide's decision, or to a coalition that used her seal as theatre. You, being practical and slightly sleepy, accept that the line between person and pattern is often drawn by whoever is holding the pen. At a balcony, you stop and look toward the old palace across the city where widowed or displaced women traditionally resided after a sultan's death. Earlier practice kept the harem largely there. Over Hurrem's lifetime, the heart of the women's world consolidates at Topkapi itself. The move, partly architectural, partly administrative, means proximity becomes permanent, not seasonal. You sense the difference in your spine. Advice that used to travel now lives next door. The empire grows used to it the way a household grows used to the hum of a fan background, constant and oddly comforting. You pass a small classroom. A girl bends over a page practicing letters. A tutor corrects posture and pen angle. This is not just etiquette, it's pipeline. The next generation absorbs not only literacy, but a sense that their skills will someday matter beyond embroidery. The palace is tutoring its future managers, and the city will feel their handwriting in lamp oil orders, school rosters, and court petitions. You inhale and the air tastes like ink dust and honeyed milk, comfort and capacity nicely paired. As the courtyard lamps are lit, you fix the shape of this emerging order in your mind, a series of relay stations. Hurrem runs the first leg, passing the baton of visibility, charity and counsel to mothers who will turn those gestures into offices with budgets. The empire learns that compassion can be scheduled, that a woman's seal can start a bridge, or stop a riot, that a barge on the Bosphorus can carry more policy than oarsmen. The joke about HR in kaftans lingers, but beneath it is a serious rhythm: interview, appoint, supervise, audit, repeat. When you finally lean against a warm column and close your eyes, you hear the night machine of Topkapi keys whispering on rings, sandals soft on tile, a distant spoon knocking the side of a pot exactly twice. You recognize the sound because you have heard it in your own life, the sound of a routine that keeps anxieties from gnawing holes in the dark. The Sultanate of Women, however we name it, is not a crown, it's a metronome. And now that you've caught its beat, you can feel how the next rooms will step there, gently begin aligning cities, stories, and even foreign imaginations to it. You drift from the women's apartments toward the low, sober room where justice wears ink instead of jewels. The door to the Imperial Council stands under a watchful tower, the Justice Tower, its windows like patient eyes, and you sense the rhythm that gives Suleiman his epithet Kanuni, the lawgiver. That mainstream fact steadies your breath under his reign. Existing sultanic regulations, Kanun, are collected and standardized alongside religious law, turning improvisation into a reference shelf. You can almost hear the pages settle into place, a soft thump like a cushion learning your shape. You pause at the threshold, while the Grand Vizier and his colleagues sit on cushions arranged with the same logic as a ledger. Petitions rustle like dry leaves, arzuhals carried in by clerks whose fingertips shine with a sheen of black ink and lamp smoke. Each is a life compressed. A widow asking for her late husband's pay, a baker demanding fair grain prices, a town seeking funds to repair a bridge after a flood. You feel Hurrem's presence not as a shadow but as a current that nudges some of those leaves toward mercy. She cannot sit in this room yet. Her council walks here on many pairs of feet. The chief black eunuch with a word, a steward with a list, a letter that arrived at dawn and now rests under the vizier's palm. You slide along the lattice to a small screened window, where tradition says the Sultan can watch unseen. Whether Suleiman sits there every day is less important than the performance itself, justice staged, so the audience always includes the possibility of the sovereign gaze. On mornings when he is away on campaign, a different kind of eyes attend. You imagine a scribe reading a note in Hurrem's voice, warm greeting first, then practical things, prices, fires a certain man too quick with punishment in a certain neighborhood. Her verb choice is the temperature setting of the city. Light joke one somewhere. A clerk invents tone policing, but only to make sure the seal wax doesn't crack. You follow a petition through its life cycle. It is logged, read, rooted to the relevant law, Sharia for inheritance or marriage, Canaan for taxation, guild rules, price ceilings, the famous NAR lists that keep staples affordable. The mainstream structure is clear. The margins are where you watch for warmth. Fines become reduced. Exile replaces harsher penalties. Compensation is paid from a fund that her wokes help replenish. You remember the soup kitchens and hospitals you walked through, mercy that runs on schedules, and see how they feed back into the justice system. A baker doesn't steal if flour is steady. A widow doesn't beg if stipends arrive. Law breathes easier when hunger is not strangling the lungs. There's a tiny glinting oddity you enjoy, the tugra. Suleiman's calligraphic signature blooms across some decrees like a garden of lines, so large that on big vellum sheets it can spread wider than your open hand. A flourish that is both art and authority, it turns decision into ornament in a way only the Ottomans could make look inevitable. Meanwhile, people whisper that petitioners sometimes scented their arzuhals to stand out, ambergris for a boatman, rose for a widow, because yes, attention is a currency even in a room that swears it is blind. Is that universally proven? The rumor smells persuasive, which is exactly how rumors like to behave. You watch one case that could have gone dark. A provincial judge, Qadi, has sentenced a thief to a severe punishment. The man's neighbors argue he is a first-time offender driven by his children's illness. The file lands in the consider clemency stack after a quiet word from the palace women's office. The outcome adjusts a fine scale to his means, a short exile to cool the neighborhood, and a spot on a work crew repairing city cisterns. Mercy here is not soft, it is maintenance. You can hear the city's plumbing relax. Historians still argue whether specific surviving clauses in Suleiman's compiled Qanun, particularly those that moderate penalties in property or price disputes, reflect Hurrem's influence, or only the broader administrative drift toward regularized justice. You note the debate and keep walking, because you are not hunting a single smoking quill. You are feeling how a person like Hurrem teaches a court to stage justice with a velvet edge. She champions dowries for poor brides. That reduces desperation. She funds hospital beds. That reduces petty theft born of untreated sickness. She sometimes insists on investigating officials known more for speed than fairness. The Qanun favors the predictable. She favors the repairable. Together, predictability with repair turns punishment from spectacle into traffic control. Light joke 2, it's less gladiator arena, more. Sir, I'm going to write you a ticket for reckless donkey parking. You study the choreography of silence. No one announces this mercy, courtesy of Hurrem. The council's decorum would choke on overt credits. Instead, you see petitions from neighborhoods near her complexes move faster. Complaints around festival times when her patronage is most visible receive particular polish. Guild disputes that threaten bread supply are soothed with the speed of someone who knows hunger makes a mockery of laws. Justice, you realize, is not only a scale, it's also a clock, and she has a hand on the minute hand. A clerk brings in a scroll with price ceilings for bread, meat, oil, the nar that Ottomans post to protect consumers. You recall your own grocery list and feel unreasonably seen by a 16th century spreadsheet. Nar can be strict. Bakers protest. Officials bristle. A palace steward arrives, raises a polite eyebrow and reminds the room of endowment grain stores that can cushion shocks. The nar holds with a little give. Somewhere outside, a child eats a loaf that doesn't shrink. You do not cheer. Cheering would wake the janissaries. You simply allow your shoulders to drop, hearing the faint clink of scales finding balance. Quirky detail: some days the divan adjourns to the harem gardens for sherbet. After long sessions, a change of air that turns hard words into digestible ones. Picture a tray of chilled pomegranate sherbet condensation tracing meticulous circles on silver. Policy appetites benefit from sugar, and everyone pretends that was not the point. You file it beside other softeners: poetry exchanged between sovereign and spouse, gifts to judges on holy days that politely bind them to public compassion festival, amnesties that let the city exhale. Is all of this perfectly documented number? Is it legible in the way the city behaves afterward? Yes, the way a room tells you the window was opened even after it's shut. You edge closer to the Justice Tower again and look up. Lantern light warms the stone, a nightlight for a restless capital. The tower doesn't judge, it watches. You think about how watching creates better behavior, how even the rumor that a woman's eyes are on you changes a governor's appetite for bribes. Historians still argue whether Hurrem's interventions ever directly overturned high-level sentences. Some chronicles hint, others stay prim. But the safer claim, and the one you feel in your bones, is this: she resets expectations. Officials learn that severity without necessity wins no gold stars. The habit of asking, "Is there a cleaner fix?" becomes contagious. You smile at a not-so-secret administrative secret. The best justice is often boring. It involves audits, standard forms, civil servants who pride themselves on being predictable, kitchen ledgers that match warehouse ledgers that match servant rosters. Your earlier image of a love letter becoming a spreadsheet comes back, and you don't mind the romance drain at all. In this room, boredom is mercy's armor. Light joke 3. Someone should embroider that on a cushion, but the cushion would immediately be misplaced in the divan closet, so perhaps a sticky note will do. By the time you slip back into the corridor, the petitions have thinned. The clerks cap their inkwells. A janitor sweeps memory out with dust. You carry one sound with you, the soft, final thud of a decree sealed and sent. Law has spoken in measured tones, and mercy has edited the adverbs. Tomorrow the same play will run different actors, same stage. A city slightly more governable because a woman you can't see refuses to treat punishment as proof of strength. You step past the kitchen door, the night cook checks his pot twice and his door once, and think not for the first time that the empire's best inventions might be schedules and second chances. You leave the Justice Tower's cool shadow and follow a different current, the thin, shining stream of ink that threads rooms together the way aqueducts thread hills. A reed pen scratches. A scribe tilts the paper to catch lamplight. A little dish of sand waits to drink excess gloss. You stand in the warm cone where a letter forms, and you realize you're watching policy hatch in private. The paper is polished, the lines even, but the temperature underneath is distinctly human: praise, worry, tact, and the soft confidence of someone who knows exactly which door a sentence will open. You read with your fingertips first. The salutation lands like velvet affection, forward status maintained, my sovereign, my joy. Those honeyed forms that keep love and hierarchy braided without knots. Then the pivot you've learned to expect: a neighborhood's repairs, prices in a market, a petition worth special attention. You remember the NAR lists and soup kitchens, and hear how this letter weaves them in the kitchen's feed as ordained. The widow's stipends flow, yet the roof at the hospice leaks again. She is not scolding, she is adjusting the city's thermostat. Light joke one, imagine, attaching a sticky note that reads, P.S. Also, the cistern is doing that thing again, except your sticky note travels with a miniature army and a wax seal. The mainstream fact steadies you: letters in Hurrem's name really do survive. Some to Suleiman, some to foreign rulers. Evidence that the consort turned Haseki participates in the empire's diplomatic voice. One famous set is addressed to the Polish-Lithuanian king, Sigismund II, Augustus, where the tone mixes graciousness with frontier practicality: keep the peace on the border mind. The merchants treat envoys well. You can feel the paper cross the Black Sea in your hands, rolled in silk, tied with a thread tucked into a courier's pouch with other small, serious prayers. The Ottomans will always love a ceremony, but here the theatre is logistical: men, horses, oars, and the serene belief that words can travel as surely as grain. You can't help savoring a quirky tidbit: palace scribes carry divots, long pen cases with slots for reeds, and a tiny inkwell tucked into their belts. Picture the 16th century equivalent of a laptop holster, except your battery is a vial of soot and gum Arabic. Another rumor filed under perfume with plausible deniability says prized letters might be lightly scented: rose for celebration, amber for gravity, so the reader's first impression arrives through the nose. Is that scientifically catalogued? Not quite. But the era loved layered signals, and scent is a signal that travels even when ink is shy. You watch how she writes up and how she writes out. Up to Suleiman away on campaign, where she praises victories under his poetic name. Muhibi then folds in updates. Prices holding a charitable fund, replenished an official whose zeal outruns his judgment. Out to border kings and local khans, urging restraint, reciprocity, and the steady, unromantic kindness that keeps caravans from bleeding money and men. Between the lines you hear the city's pulse. The letters don't order the wind, they trim the sails. Historians still argue whether every surviving turn of phrase is hers or a chancery's polished mirror, dictated, drafted, redrafted. But even in the neat bureaucracy, her preferred weather shows less thunderclap, more rain that arrives on time. You track the path a single page takes after sealing. A steward logs the copy. A messenger memorizes the gist in case of loss. A captain counts the river miles. A harbour official stamps the ledger. Somewhere in a border fort, a sleepy clerk breaks the wax and inhales rose or amber or nothing at all, then tries on the voice inside, gentle, exact, and very hard to refuse. Light joke too. Imagine trying to ghost a letter when the read receipt is literally the falconer who watched you open it and is now staring at you with a bird that looks like it pays its taxes early. You glance back toward the council chamber and understand how this private ink pressures public outcomes. A governor, thinking of squeezing a guild a little too hard, receives a reminder courteous but precise that the kitchens must never run short. A border captain, tempted by raiding season's adrenaline, receives a braided gift, compliments for vigilance, a nudge toward ransom not slaughter, and a suggestion of mutual benefit if traders keep trading. This is not softness. It's maintenance. You've seen it before in the Nar and the Wok. Here the instrument is grammar. You notice too how letters make safety feel like an economic product you can order off a polite menu. Peace for your merchants and mine is the pitch. Stable revenue for your stores and mine is the close. The empire likes this pitch. So does the king up north. Even when skirmishes zing across the steppe like angry bees, envoys continue sharing sherbet and letters continue proposing that tomorrow's bees stay in the hive. Historians still argue whether particular ceasefires or prisoner exchanges owe themselves directly to Hürrem's pen or to the Grand Viziers, or whether both were tuned to the same larger logic. Prophet prefers peace longer than pride. Does. You step closer to a page meant only for Suleiman and recognize a second function, intimacy, as policy lever. She praises his courage, then lightly reframes a decision, perhaps the appointment of a calmer judge in a rough quarter, perhaps mercy for a petitioning craftsman. The careful crossing from affection to action feels like watching silk become rope. The palace is full of those weave points. Letters just make them visible. If you've ever written a text that begins "Hope your day is going well" and ends with "By the way, could we consider moving the deadline? Congratulations, you and Hurrem share a minor at the University of Strategic Warmth." Back in the lamplight, a different kind of page lies open, the register of copies. It is the palace's memory, safer than rumor. A clerk's marginal doodle, a tiny tulip, sneaks a smile onto the sober record. You love that. The empire builds with tulips and totals at the same time. A small oddity, someone once swore to you, certain couriers tied bells to their saddles at night to discourage thieves, not because thieves dislike bells, but because farmers wake at the sound and peek out, and eyes are a form of armor. Proven possibly apocryphal. Still, the image fits the mood, small, practical theater for a safer road. And the road is the true subject. Letters stitch it together. The ink you're following binds kitchens to courts, harbors to harvests, and domestic calm to foreign respect. A single gracious paragraph about the well-being of envoys can cool a town that would otherwise sell hospitality as vengeance. Conversely, a phrase too sharp can turn a slight into a season of reprisals. That's why you feel the letters throb like arteries. They carry temperament as much as instruction. She seems to know it, and you learn it by osmosis. Tone is infrastructure. It's tempting this far into the night to ask for receipts with red circles. Which crisis cooled because a particular letter landed? Which appointment changed because a compliment arrived at the right hour? Historians still argue whether we can map direct causation without pretending the archives are CCTV. You refuse the false precision and choose the more honest sensation. Remove these letters, and the room grows louder, harsher, clumsier. Keep them and the edges soften. The clock keeps better time. The city eats. You leave the writing desk last after the scribe has capped the inkwell and sprinkled sand over the final line. The seal sets. The wax blushes. The courier bows. He will ride until the moon looks like a sliver of tin, and the dawn smells of damp wool and horses. Somewhere on the far side of that ride, a ruler you will never meet will touch this page, inhale rose or amber or nothing at all, and make a choice that keeps someone you will never know, fed, freed, or simply unafraid. And you, standing here with your own phone on night mode, feel the odd brotherhood of messages that move the world without ever raising their voices. Light joke 3, yes, it's basically email, except your out-of-office reply is a ceremonial fountain and a poem. You step out beneath a shallow bluing sky and follow the smell of stone warmed by sun, mixed with cumin and soap, a surprisingly comforting recipe, and the city guides you to the places where mercy puts on architecture like a well-fitted coat. The name you've been whispering all night is set into Mortonau Husky. You read it not like a title but like a compass, and it points you straight into a complex where domes behave like organized thoughts. You move through the courtyard of Herculei, the multi-building endowment that gathers a mosque, a school, a soup kitchen, hospital rooms, and a caretaker's world into a single daily poem. The mainstream fact steadies your sandals. These are among Mimar Sinan's early major commissions, the great imperial architect who serves under Suleiman and beyond, and Hürrem's patronage helps set his hand into the city's skyline. The courtyard is a calm drum. You feel it in your ribs. A child runs across the paving stones. A gatekeeper's beads clink in a rhythm that sounds suspiciously like a metronome for compassion. You press your palm to the limestone, and it returns the day's warmth with interest. Inside, the mosque light arrives through windows staged like breath-washing calligraphy that curls with the assurance of someone who believes letters can save lives. You stand off to the side because you don't need to command the room. The room is already obeying time. Outside again, you watch a porter nudge a cart of flatbread toward the immaret, the soup kitchen, the same way the moon nudges tides. The ledger lives here not as paper but as ladles. You lean into the doorway where the kitchen breathes steam. Copper cauldrons dark with years of service imitate moons in different phases. An overseer checks the fire, 2 apprentices tie their aprons, and a clerk, yes, a clerk, keeps today's count with the care of a man counting heartbeats. Lentils, onions, a bay leaf for good manners. Your earlier joke about spreadsheets becoming streetlights returns with a grin. If spreadsheets had domes, they'd look like this coulier. Light joke 1 somewhere. A modern influencer promises 5 Ottoman meal prep hacks, and every grandmother in Istanbul just raises one eyebrow and keeps stirring. You've heard people insist charity is a feeling. In this courtyard, you learn charity is a schedule. The Waqf deed folded away in cedar lists. The revenue streams, rents from shops, fields outside the city, a bathhouse's fees, even tiny kiosk stalls that sell sherbet or thread. Those line items pay for bread, spices, oil, a physician's stipend, a porter's wages, a mason's repairs, a scribe's ink and lamp oil so the rooms don't scold the dark. The kitchen line moves with quiet briskness, and when a neighbor steps out of line to help a woman with a heavy pot, no one scolds him either. It's the only line on earth where being on the list gets you soup, not spam. Light joke 2 unsubscribe. Never. You'd only get hungrier. You tuck a quirky tidbit under your tongue like a seed. One of her most striking gifts to the city is a double bathhouse near Hagia Sophia, a hammam, with men's and women's sections aligned along a single axis. An elegant, unusual layout people still point out when they're showing visitors how grace and geometry flirt. You drift into the warm room and everything glows marble ribs on the dome, little star holes of light basins that catch whispers as well as water. Attendants speak softly. The air smells like lemon and laurel. Without microphones, the bath perfected acoustics centuries ago. Gossip travels but dissolves nicely in steam. You sit on warm stone, and your bones hum in a register that cancels anxiety. The bath is not frivolous. It is civic infrastructure for sanity. Wash a city, and it quarrels less. You take the road in your head farther out because her architecture does. Past the city walls, past the silver ribbon of the Bosphorus, you follow the bread trail to Jerusalem, where another endowment lays out table and roof for the poor, and the pious for travelers and scholars immaret. Hospice bakery, market stalls, that fund them all stitched within the old city's stones like a permanent kindness. If you close your eyes, you can hear the oven doors thump, the low murmur of daily thanks, the clink of a ladle against a pot that refuses to learn the word closed. Historians still argue whether the Jerusalem Foundation primarily served locals or seasonal waves of pilgrims, and whether the portions promised on paper always matched reality on rough weeks. You accept the debate and keep the simpler sensation the oven door keeps opening. You circle back to the Waqf papers that make this endurance possible. A steward reads out the clauses like a lullaby: this shop's rent to that kitchen, that field's crop to this hospital, the bath's fees to lamp oil, the baker's grain to be purchased at fair prices, contingency funds for roof tiles and winter wood. The documents assign duties and penalties, inspectors named, audits scheduled, because a good intention without maintenance is just wishful weather. You smile at the bureaucracy of goodness. Nothing says I care quite like an annual report that balances. Light joke 3 somewhere. An auditor cradles a ledger, the way poets cradle heartbreak, and both insist theirs is the more universal language. You stoop near the hospital rooms where the air smells cleaner, sharper like vinegar and thyme. A physician consults a thin book. A nurse ties a child's wrist ribbon so the dose tally behaves. A clerk marks arrivals. The empire's medicine isn't your medicine, but the choreography is familiar triage measure, soothe, repeat. In a side room, a mother sits on a bench under a window, and the light on her cheekbone makes the entire enterprise look like faith. The mainstream fact threads here again. Her complexes include hospitals and schools, not just mosques and kitchens, because illness and ignorance are both kinds of hunger. The stones also speak image. You feel it without cynicism. Patronage draws eyes, and eyes educate. A woman's name etched into marble says to whomever needs to hear it that compassion can carry a seal, that competence can look like a veil and a balance sheet at once. Historians still argue whether her building program is primarily pious philanthropy, family strategy, or careful public relations. You give in to the most boring answer, yes, and discover that boring is often beautiful. Soup still tastes like soup, even when it also tastes like prestige. A tiny oddity glints in a corner. The bath's lost and found board once held single slippers more often than pairs, proof that heat melts attention to detail. Attendants joked, so someone swore in a memoir that if you want the truth about a neighborhood, ask the man who keeps the sandals. Proven who knows. But you honor the man and his sandals anyway. His job keeps toes safe, which is a surprisingly high percentage of human happiness. You step back into the courtyard and count systems disguised as scenery. A chain of little roof spouts nudges rain toward cisterns. A lattice breaks wind without breaking the view. The well's rope is thick, where many hands pull. Nothing is accidental. When you look up at the dome again, you realize it is also a clock. Shadows move across the calligraphy like hands, and the courtyard learns when to hush and when to bustle. The city, in the presence of these buildings, grows a new muscle, the reflex to expect help. Expectation is half the work of mercy. And because you insist on carrying modern asides like talismans, you feel the usability of it all. Clear signage, logical flow, clean sightlines, the way bakers and nurses never have to argue with doors. You compare it to apps you've abandoned because their buttons hid. This complex hides nothing essential. It stages kindness where the tired can find it. Your shoulders drop a little more. When you finally leave, the gatekeeper nods as if you completed a small pilgrimage. You catch one last detail. A vine willing itself up the wall, tiny tendrils negotiating with stone. That's what these places feel like, green climbing patience. If letters were nerves, these are bones. If festivals were smiles, these are teeth. You step back into the street and know that you have walked through a legacy that doesn't need to be remembered to work. It runs on clocks, on coins, on carefully signed pages, and on the steady human appetite for bread warmth and a good rinse. You carry the steam under your skin like a pocket of summer, and you promise yourself that when your own day tries to fray, you'll go stand somewhere with a dome and practice mercy until it becomes a habit, not a headline. You kneel beside the ledger you've been circling all night, the one that creaks like a friendly door, and you finally read it out loud with your fingertips. Columns march neatly, rents from shops, tolls from a small hand, fees from the bath harvest, dues from a patchwork of fields, even a mill whose wheel turns grain into the arithmetic of mercy. Across the gutter, expenses bloom like a garden kept in strict rows: bread, flour, lamp oil, vinegar, and thyme for the hospital soap, for the bath, wages for porters and nurses, repairs to roof tiles, and a silver ribbon of dowries for brides who would otherwise start married life with empty trunks. This is where kindness learns to be punctual. You meet the Mutavelli, the trustee who runs the endowment like a ship. He carries a key ring that would make a jailer jealous and a memory for names that would make a poet blush. On distribution day, he stands by the immaret door with a clerk and a scale calling out portions by the book. Today it's lentil stew and a round of bread stamped with the wax mark. Tomorrow, bulgur pilaf, always enough for the registered poor, widows, travelers, and the sick. A baker bows in with a tray. A nurse slips out with a basket. A boy receives a loaf with such concentration that you want to laugh and cry at once. Light joke 1: if Michelin had existed, This kitchen would get a star for consistent portion size under heavy political weather. The mainstream fact steadies you like a handrail in the Ottoman world. Wakes pious endowments recognized by the courts fund a huge share of social welfare from schools and fountains to hospitals and bridges. Hürrem's own wafs are documented in Istanbul and Jerusalem in particular, a Courtier in the city that feeds, teaches and heals, a Jerusalem emirate that puts hot bread into hands along the pilgrim roads. Their deeds specify revenue streams, duties, audits and enforcement by the local judge, so good intentions grow a spine. The paper says plainly let this continue, and the city surprisingly often obeys. You lift your eyes from the ledger and follow the money outward. Rent from a row of shops near the bazaar pays for winter wood. Bath fees supply lamp oil. A garden's lease underwrites a midwife's retainer, so the poor don't birth alone at night. The dowry fund Sayyiz opens its cedar chest, a pair of shoes, a dress, copper pots, a mattress, a little cash. Select Friday's brides queue with their guardians under the watch of a Qadi's clerk. Names are read, signatures or careful crosses go down, and a small crowd claps because survival deserves applause. Historians still argue whether these funds primarily targeted freed slave women to knit them safely into the city or whether they flowed as broadly as the deeds imply. You accept the uncertainty while watching tears soak into new fabric. A quirky tidbit sparkles from a marginal note. The endowment's birdman. Yes, there is one buys barley, to scatter on the mosque roof ledges where tiny stone bird palaces, those ornate niches that look like fairy houses, give pigeons a townhouse. District. Another line item pays a boy to carry a shallow dish of water to a corner where cats prefer to lord it over the afternoon. Is feeding birds and cats the best use of funds? On paper, it looks frivolous. In practice, it's pest control plus mercy, which is very on-brand for a city that treats sanitation and kindness like cousins. Light joke 2, Istanbul basically invents the pet influencer economy, but the sponsorship is a wak, and the post is a purr. You keep reading and bump into the money that is not a building at all, the cash wak. Instead of brick, it endows coin which the trustee lends to artisans on profit and loss terms. Earnings then pay the soup and soap bills. It's an elegant financial origami, controversial in its day. Historians still argue whether cash wakafs nudge too close to usury, or whether wrapped in lawful contracts they are a brilliant way to make money behave piously. You watch the shoemaker repay his loan after a good season, and feel the kitchen exhale because the stew just secured itself for another month. The audit day arrives like a quiet holiday for accountants. The trustee spreads the books. The inspector runs a thin finger down columns. The Qadi's clerk coughs politely at a smudged figure. Corrections are made. Somewhere in this process, a porter gets a raise for faithful service, and a mason gets a warning for cutting corners on gutters. This is not heroic, but it is how roofs don't leak. You've learned tonight that Mercy's favorite costume is boredom. Light joke 3. The empire should mint a coin with a spreadsheet on one side and a ladle on the other. Collectors would swoon, cooks would shrug, auditors would frame it. You walk the circuit of small kindnesses that money makes daily, a stack of lamp wicks for the winter dusk, so students can finish their lines. A pile of firewood tickets ready to be redeemed after the first frost. A basket of swaddling cloths in the hospice because babies have the indecency to arrive when they're ready, not when the budget is. There's a note about milk money for nursing mothers, tiny but steady, and a repair voucher for a neighborhood fountain whose spout refuses to aim properly, soaking every passerby within a 4-step radius. Someone prints a little sign. Stand left if you enjoy unintended ablution. You adore them for it. On days when the bread queue grows longer, the trustee opens a storage cell that smells like clean grain and a good winter. He has bought at fair price as the NAR lists require, and the seal on the door carries the endowment's threat: mismanage this, and the court will make a sermon of your name. Does that always work? Historians still argue whether enforcement kept up with ambition across decades and distant managers. You know only what your nose tells you. The stew is hot, the bread is warm, the hospital does not echo with emptiness, and the bath smells delightfully of laurel instead of panic. You detour to the marketplace and see how Waqf money hums there too. A stall selling thread pays rent into the dowry chest. A sherbet seller does the same. A scribe who copies deeds and petitions his own work nested in the wake's legality pays into lamp oil. The city's arteries are paved with reciprocal obligations, and somehow it doesn't feel like paperwork so much as choreography. Teachers receive stipends, so the school courtyard keeps sounding like multiplication and sparrows. The imam receives his salary, so funerals are held with dignity and weddings with words that make knees tremble. You dare to think that the city as a creature likes these routines. They scratch where it itches. Another odd morsel from the ledger's margins during Ramazan, the endowment funds a night drummer to walk the quarter at pre-dawn, tapping a steady beat so people don't oversleep their meal before the fast. There's a reason your heartbeat finds these rhythms so comforting. They are centuries old and designed to sit exactly where your nerves live. The drummer passes, the kitchen fires bloom, and for a few weeks the night tastes of cumin and sugar and the dust of drums. Not every line is sweetness. You see fines for a baker who shaved loaves too thin, a dismissal for a caretaker who sold kindling on the side, a black mark for a steward who delayed paying the hospital's vinegar supplier. The system has teeth, even if it smiles more than it bites. And when a bad harvest hits or war jostles the supply lines, the WAC's emergency clause releases, reserves, and permission to borrow relief not as charity theatre, but as duty. By late afternoon, coins clink in cloth purses, doors close softly, and the ledger's ribbon is tied shut until tomorrow. You straighten your knees, feeling the pleasant ache of having watched money behave. The city around you is less glamorous than a palace courtyard, but it is warmer. You catch one last glance at the dowry chest, the lamp oil jar, the barley sack for birds, and the careful line that reads for bread to be stamped, so that none mistake the hand that gives. Whether that line is pride or transparency, historians still argue. You decide it is both, and you carry its simple wisdom with you. In a world of shouted promises, stamped bread tastes like proof. You slip into the quiet rooms where fabric hangs like pauses and realize that image is also a kind of infrastructure, stitched, staged, and serviced like a bath's hot water. A dresser opens a cedar chest, and the room exhales rose and camphor. Silks wink, velvets purr. A tray of jewels tries not to look impatient. You're here to watch how Hürrem turns herself into a symbol without ever striking a coin. The mainstream fact steadies your step in the Ottoman world. Sovereigns do not put faces on currency. Authority travels instead through the tugra, that imperial calligraphic monogram. Portraiture lives mostly in miniatures and the minds of foreign painters. So visibility has to be engineered with other tools: gifts, festivals, robes, roots, rumor. Start with gifts, the empire's favorite sentences that happen to sparkle. A Venetian ambassador steps into a hall that smells faintly of amber. He bows. He rises, wearing a hill, at a robe of honor, its pile stroked in the correct direction so the light applauds. That robe didn't just fall out of a generous sky. Someone selected its color steadiness, its pattern, good taste without rivalry, and its lining warmth as politics. The robe says you are seen and also please behave. Hürrem becomes fluent in this grammar. Her gifts to scholars, purses of coin, sealed with ribbon to governors' wives, textiles that flatter rather than blare, to shrines silver lamps that teach night to be gentler, speak a calm dialect of authority. Light joke 1. If you've ever labeled a housewarming present basil plant but meant, please invite me back, you're already doing court language at a beginner level. Festivals are the loud version of the same grammar. The city loves an imperial celebration, and you float along its edge like a careful extra in a very expensive play. Guilds parade with props that are half advertisement, half fever, dream bakers pushing rolling ovens, boatmen dragging painted boats through streets that briefly pretend to be rivers, confectioners rolling out sugar palaces and candied palm, trees called nahal that wink at the sun like giant chandeliers on holiday. Somewhere a boy rides a papier-mâché lion and waves as if he has always been made of courage. The surname Humayun, those illustrated festival books, will later pin these days to paper so tightly you can still hear the symbols, but for now you stand with the crowd and feel how carefully joy is curated. Hürrem's hand hides in the logistics, which widows receive alms first, Which guild gets the brighter corner? Which fountain runs rosewater for an hour at dusk so the city remembers softness on its skin? Costume is policy in the closet. You skim the edges of the wardrobe and read the palette like a memo. Deep blues and sober greens for gravity days. Pomegranate silk for weddings and pledges. Embroidery that cites a tulip rather than trumpets it, because in a room where envy is a resident, modesty is body armor. Attendants lay out matching sets for her ladies, so the harem looks like a chord rather than a group of soloists. A slender sash in a particular weave becomes a quiet team jersey. A shared perfume note, a measure of rose under musk, becomes a chorus. You think of our earlier scent wardrobe and smile. Here it's not just a signature, it's a brand book. Light joke too, somewhere a modern marketer is drafting a deck titled From Hillat to # Lessons in Cohesive Visual Identity, and Hurrem would flip through it once and say, "Good, now make sure the breadline moves." Visibility itself is staged like shadow theatre. She rarely appears to crowds, but when she moves, the route is a thesis, a discreet barge along the Bosphorus at the hour when light forgives faces, a litter angled so screens suggest presence without making it edible, a stop at a hospice before a school so mercy precedes ambition. In the palace, a golden meshed look lets women observe ceremonies unseen. From there, she can choose when to let a silhouette be enough and when a rumor of earrings will do the work. You realize how many instruments exist between seen and invisible, and how expertly she plays that scale. Historians still argue whether particular protocols, the sequence of festival seats, the pattern of public arms, bear her personal design or reflect older customs she tuned. Either way, the music feels more legible after her. Miniatures complicate the mirror. Court painters nakash flatten time onto paper so rooms can carry their own past in a pocket. Hürrem's likeness in Ottoman books tends toward the emblematic, but abroad European artists start guessing. A famous red-haired Sultana Rossa circulates in circles that adore exotic certainty. Some attribute it to Titian's studio, some to hopeful copyists. Historians still argue whether those faces actually belong to her or to a composite of fantasy and second-hand description. You hold the thought gently. What matters for the city she lives in is that she doesn't need a painted billboard. Her buildings, her kitchen lines, her dowry chests, her scent trailing down a hallway, these become portraits that breathe. The theatre extends to tableware and textiles you'll never see in a gallery, but that rehearse a message daily. Bowls delivered to the Emirate on festival eves bear stamped motifs that match the bread stamp. Remember that stamped bread, so the poor touch consistency with both hands. The bath's towels share a border pattern you noticed in the school's prayer rugs, a signature that whispers you are inside one intention. A tiny quirky tidbit peeks out from an inventory during a spring festival. A sherbet fountain is rigged in a courtyard so that pale red sweetness flows through a carved marble mouth. Children drink from cups etched with the wax name, and it is said, "Try to kiss the fountain," which ends badly for sleeves but beautifully for memory. Proven beyond doubt, let the stains on those sleeves testify. Ambassadors learn the choreography too. They present clocks, automata glass horses with manes that misbehave like poetry. They leave carrying sable brocade and a story to tell home in which Hurrem appears not as a face but as an atmosphere. The Hillat, they receive fits like a plot twist. Suddenly they are complicit in Ottoman grace. On the day an envoy misses a protocol bow, the corrective is not thunder but velvet. The next morning, a carefully chosen garment arrives, with a note warm as a bakery door. The message: we dress mistakes in dignity, and you will from now on do the same. Inside the women's quarters, theatre is even more precise. Seating on cushions is a diagram of affinities. The placement of sherbet bowls is a forecast. The silk thrown over an empty cushion is either a courtesy for a latecomer or a calculated absence. You remember our old friend the backgammon rumour, and read the boards now as invitations as much as games. Even silence has costumes. A pale scarf means not today, a heavier one come back at dusk. Once you know the legend on this map, a corridor becomes a press release. All the while the ethical spine holds. The aim isn't glitter for glitter's sake, it's governance by mood. If a city feels seen, it behaves. If a court feels fed, it listens. The sewer's sugar palaces are edible arguments for abundance. The robe's warmth is a nudge toward loyalty. The careful non-portrait is a refusal to let one face eclipse an office. Historians still argue whether this careful curating, softened or disguised hard edges did the theatre lull or sharpen judgment. And you keep the question alive, as you have all night. The answer lies less in declarations than in whether the bread queue moves and the bath stays hot. By the time night leans into the courtyards and candles bloom like patient planets, you feel oddly rested by the spectacle. Perhaps it's because nothing here is accidental and intentionality is calming. You pass a last window and catch a reflection of yourself carrying someone else's light. That's the trick of good image craft. It makes you feel part of the kindness it stages. You don't need a coin with her face. You have streets with her habits. Light joke 3. If you must collect something, skip rare portraits and collect schedules. Their resale value in peace of mind is unbeatable. You drift on the scent of rose and lamp oil threading the air, remembering the sherbet fountain and the stamped bread, and the cat's water dish funded by a ledger that also buys dowries. The theatre continues whether you applaud or sleep. It's designed that way, like the hum of your fan, like the steady tick of a clock behind a closed curtain, so that mercy wears its costume and does its job even in the dark. You follow the line where kitchens fade into corridors of kinship, and the steam off the soup turns into the fog that always gathers around a throne room when sons are old enough to sign their names. You stand at a window and watch the city's roof settle for evening, while inside cushions and glances do more work than swords would dare. The mainstream fact steadies your breathing. Hürrem is mother to Princes Mehmed Selim Bayezid and the ailing Cihangir, and to the Princess Mihrimah, whose marriage to the Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha in 1539 knots the bureaucracy to the Princess Mihrimah. Bloodline with a groom's sash, you can practically hear tighten. You're not here for scandal headlines. You're here to feel how one woman mothering in public becomes precedent in the palace handbook. The palace has a tradition for princes called the Sankak Road, sending young heirs out as provincial governors to learn how grain moves, how men sulk, and how winters get personal. You trace the postings with your fingertip like routes on a map, Mehmed to Manisa Selim, later to Manisa, and then to Kütahya Bayezid to Kütahya Mustafa Mahidevran's son to Amasya. You see, the geometry distance is policy. A son close to the capital is comfort or danger, depending on who sleeps badly that week. If you've ever tried to seat relatives at a wedding without causing a family weather event, you have the gist. Light joke 1. Imagine using Google Maps' Avoid Toll Roads feature, but for avoid coups and the app keeps recalculating. Mihrimah's marriage is the bright ribbon threading all this. She becomes daughter of the house who writes letters, and Rustam becomes Damat the groom, permanently labelled by his tie to the dynasty. He is competent, severe when needed, thrifty enough to make treasurers preen, and suddenly your mental ledger of kitchens and hospitals has a new column: favors owed by very capable men. The wedding sadaid with its parades, the sugar palaces we tasted earlier, the candle forests, those aren't just spectacle, they're paperwork you can walk through. A quirky tidbit hides in the ankle-deep gossip. Rustam's gout supposedly made him favor certain boots lined like winter thoughts. Courtiers read that limp as omen, or irritation depending on the hour. Does footwear really determine policy? Perhaps not, but the palace is fluent in footnotes like that. And then comes the dark hinge you can't avoid, even with the softest voice. Mustafa, the eldest and popular with soldiers, dies on campaign in 1553 by the Sultan's order. You keep the details PG because sleep deserves mercy, but you let the weight be felt. A father convinced his own son endangers the throne. A court where whispers travel faster than horses. A decision that echoes through every room you've walked tonight. Historians still argue whether Hürrem and Rustam engineered Mustafa's fall, or whether they were only convenient masks for deeper anxieties. The frontier general's loyalties, the old guard's nostalgia, the arithmetic of multiple sons in a system that doesn't do primogeniture. You hold the debate lightly, the way you hold a warm cup, careful not to spill aware of heat. The ripple from that act pushes other pieces. Cihangir, frail and grieving, dies shortly after. Mehmed had already died earlier, young of illness. The succession landscape narrows to Selim and Bayezid, and the palace exhales with the tension of a room learning that a choice is now inevitable. You watch Hürrem do the work you hope you never have to do, mothering adults strategically. Letters nudge postings, envoys adjust narratives, festivals highlight the stability everyone wants to want. The Sankak geometry tightens again, whose province is nearer, whose road gets better, repairs whose steward buys better, grain whose scribes write steadier letters. Logistics are loyalties with receipts. You step into a small room where maps are kept rolled like patient snakes. On the wall hangs a list of sanctioned marriages for minor princesses and senior officials, each not a leash on a possible crisis. You notice how Mihrimah's influence grows, her counsel to her father, her charitable programs, the rumor of her own letters outward. The city learns to expect a woman's signature on public calm and a woman's whisper in private thunder. If you're looking for precedent, it's here, a princess not parked in a palace but plugged into power like a badly labeled cord that everyone now agrees shouldn't be moved. Bayezid, hot-blooded and sure he reads the wind, misreads it. In 1559 he gathers supporters, clashes with his brother Selim's forces and flees toward the Safavid border. 2 years later he dies in Persian custody. You keep the edges soft, but you let the outcome stand like a cold pillar in a warm room. A mother's fear has an address now. Future courts will build architecture around avoiding this precise thunderclap. Historians still argue whether the later kafes system, secluding princes in the palace rather than sending them out, begins as early as this trauma or hardens only later. You feel the seed planted here. Regardless, the empire learns to prefer a nervous prince at home to a charismatic governor abroad. And what of Selim? He becomes Selim II in 1566, the first of Hürrem's sons to inherit. Historians love neat arcs. Reality settles for patterns. Selim's reign is steadier than the rumors about his taste for wine imply. A bureaucracy raised on schedules carries him more than he carries it. You recognize a quieter precedent, yet an empire able to function on routines of law and work, even when the sovereign is less volcanic than his father. The kitchens still ladle, the baths still steam, the dowry chest still opens on Fridays. A mother's decades of turning empathy into infrastructure means the city can survive personality shifts without losing its pulse. Light joke too, it's like switching from a manual transmission sultan to automatic. The car still moves, just with fewer dramatic gear noises. You return to Mihrimah for a moment, because she is the hinge that doesn't creak. Her marriage to Rustam and her proximity to power make her both emissary and example. There's a charming oddity in the chronicles. She is associated with 2 waterfront mosques that frame the Bosphorus like parentheses, one in Üsküdar, one in Edirneköpü. So rumors grow that she could signal with lamps across the strait. Is it architectural romance? Almost certainly. But the image fits our night. A daughter's light, answering a father's across-water policy spelled in brightness, the city reading it as reassurance. Family politics is also calendar politics. Auspicious days for postings, calendars marked for births and circumcisions and public festivals. Court astrologers asked to pick an hour when a signature will land like a blessing instead of a challenge. You don't need to endorse the stars to appreciate the way timing shapes outcomes. Even your phone reminders do that with less incense. The palace simply bakes the hunch into ritual and ritual into rhythm. Light joke 3 somewhere. A Munexim court astrologer would thrive as a modern product manager, except he'd insist on shipping only when Mercury isn't, being dramatic. Through all this you keep one image steady. Hürrem standing between a bedchamber and a council chamber, translating lullabies into memos, birthdays into budgets, weddings into wires that hold the tent in wind. The controversies, Mustafa's death, Bayezid's rebellion, leave marks that later generations trace with trembling fingers. But the template that outlasts the tremors is administrative marry capacity to kinship. Bring princes close, build institutions that feed the city, when politics chews its lip, and normalize women as nodes where information enters the sovereign bloodstream. By the time you leave these rooms, the night outside smells like lamp oil and the cat's dish you filled 2 sections ago. You've learned that dynastic survival in this house is not a single decision but a choreography of near misses. that the stamped bread still matters on days when letters burn hotter, that a backgammon board can be a map of a morning, and that precedent is just tomorrow's habit trying on today's cloak. You close the door with 2 fingers the way careful people do, and promise yourself you'll remember the lesson in your own small republics of family and work seat. The feuding cousins far apart, choose the hour wisely, and make sure the kitchen doesn't run out of bread while everyone argues about the seating chart. You leave the latticework of family rooms and step into the city's louder lungs, the bazaar, the docks, the caravanserai where influence moves, without titles like warm air rising on its own good sense. Stalls tilt open like eyelids, scales blink. A guild elder ties his apron as ceremoniously as a judge ties an argument. You watch Hurrem's touch run along these tables and ropes, not as a signature but as a habit others adopt. To pay on time, post the NAR price. Clearly keep the bread stamp honest, feed the cats so the grain stores don't turn into a mouse. Opera. The palace can decree. The city decides. Tonight, you listen to the deciding. Start with the cloth. Bursa silk merchants' finger bolts that could quiet a crowd. One lifts a length, the shade of dusk, and mutters that the Haseki's kitchens buy from honest mills, the sort of remark that sounds like gossip but functions like compliance software. Farther down, an Iznik tile factor's apprentice whispers about the new apple green they coax from copper, the color that will soon braid mosques and baths into a single visual sentence. These people do not attend council. They attend ovens and vats. And yet you feel decisions echoing in glazes and thread counts, because public works the complexes you walked, the double hammam you steamed in commission goods, set standards and make 1,000 small masters wealthier by asking them to be. Excellent. You cross into Galata where foreign languages bob in the air like gulls. Genoese and Venetian brokers swap maritime weather. Armenian and Greek traders consider whether the Black Sea is feeling temperamental. Jewish physicians and moneymen, heirs of families welcomed after 1492, carry news as professionally as they carry remedies. The mainstream fact settles you. Moses Haimon, a Jewish physician, serves Suleiman's court with distinction, one of several Haimons who do, and you imagine his quiet visits threading palace and port, a reminder that skill outruns creed when the sovereign's pulse is in play. You picture Hurrem's world leaning into such competence, the kitchen reliable because the miller is, the bath hot because the wood buyer measured well, the city calmer because the doctor shows up before the rumor does. Light joke one somewhere, a guild writes its meeting minutes on a cutting board. The secretary insists it's version, controlled the baker insists it's well-floured. You step into a coffee scent you're not supposed to know yet, but your nose knows an uprising when it smells one. In the mid-16th century, whisper it, the first coffeehouses open in Istanbul, people say around 1554, founded by men from Aleppo and Damascus. Cups click, tongues loosen, poetry duels meet dice games under smoky rafters. The city acquires a new nervous system. News travels faster than the fastest mule and opinion inflates like yeast. You feel the palace twitch. Coffee is novel enough to invite rulings. Some jurists frown, some shrug, and eventually the drink survives because wakefulness is a public good. Nobody had the courage to predict in a fatwa. Historians still argue whether these early coffee houses are immediately political or just glorified living rooms. Your ears report that a room where men learn to sit for hours and talk is a room the state will soon learn to visit. Hürrem herself never lounges there, but she hears the echo: kitchens must feed, laws must breathe, and now coffee must be reckoned with because information just found a chair. You trail the chief black eunuch's courier down toward the docks and face south in your mind toward the holy cities. The office that mediates between the harem and the world also touches endowments linked to Mecca and Medina. Caravans of coin and grain keep piety logistical. The road is long, the scheduling severe, and when a mule fails halfway to Damascus, a clerk in Istanbul eventually loses sleep. Hurrem's Jerusalem walk stitches into this fabric like a reinforcing seam. The networks beyond the palace, pilgrimage routes, caravanserai, tax farms, grain depots, know the feel of a feminine seal even when a man carries the satchel. Historians still argue whether she cultivated direct ties with particular Sufi lodges or relied chiefly on palace intermediaries to keep religious networks friendly to her projects. You accept the ambiguity the way you accept the wind, present directional, sometimes politely refusing to be mapped. At a guild hall near the Golden Horn, boatmen recite their oaths with hands on an oar dinged by a lifetime of river quarrels. The foreman lists duties, fines, and the festival day when the guild will parade a mock boat through a street that pretends to be water. Everyone laughs in the right places because theatre is the glue of belonging. The palace doesn't own these men, the city does. But a woman who funds lamps and soups owns something else. They want predictable mercy. When a boat capsizes and the guild petitions for widows' relief, the appeal finds her steward faster than a single candle finds darkness. That speed becomes memory, and memory becomes loyalty. You cut through a scribe's courtyard where market contracts and marriage contracts share the afternoon sun. A cash work loan is being counted into a tailor's calloused hands. His guild elder witnesses, a clerk notes the profit, share that will loop the money back to the soup pots. The tailor kisses his fingertips and touches the ledger, a habit that reads like superstition and works like gratitude. Mainstream people would call this finance. You tonight call it a city deciding not to break. Quirky tidbit for your pocket: in some quarters, apprentices mark their promotion by hanging their first proper tool above the shop door for a week, all shuttle shears, so neighbors can nod at the new competence every time they pass. Is it rule or cozy rumor? Either way, the street behaves as if it matters. You turn into a madrasa courtyard where students chant the kind of logic that makes headaches feel pious. The Shaykhul Islam, under Suleiman Ebu Suud Effendi, builds fatwas that harmonize sultanic regulation with religious law, smoothing the path that Qanun and Sharia walk together. There's your mainstream fact again, breaking through like a minaret in mourning. You don't see Hurrem here, not with your eyes, but you hear how her projects benefit from the Thor he engineers, the legality of regulated prices, the placid acceptance of cash walks, when framed correctly, the sense that the city's conscience can enjoy bureaucracy without sin. Historians still argue whether Hurrem and Ebu Suud correspond directly, or whether her influence flows through officials who cite his opinions when defending her endowments. Either way, comfort and compliance share a bench in this courtyard and look surprisingly married. On the key customs, men press seals into wax thick as jam. A crate of glassware from Venice clears a bale of wool from Amasya. Lingers, someone jokes. The stamp looks like a fish and will soon swim off if they don't work faster. Light joke too, the customs office has 2 speeds now, and after sherbet. Both are technically measurable in spoons. The Haseki's steward passes with papers that make dockhands stand a little straighter. Nobody wants to be the hiccup between a wok and its supplies. That's the thing about networks, you can't see them unless they stall. Tonight they hum, so you only notice the music. You wander through a Sufi teke where drums do theology softly, and a soup kettle mumbles doctrine the poor can understand. A sheikh nods at your curiosity, and you realize that a city's gentlest institutions, lodges, schools, baths, are also its loudest letters to the future. Hurrem's habit of funding such places does not colonize them, it stabilizes them. In return, they keep neighborhoods from boiling over when prices wobble, or when soldiers swagger through with news that tastes like smoke. A lodge's kitchen buys a day of peace. A bathhouse buys 10. A school buys a decade. You're counting in strange units now, but the math works in your bones. A man with oil-stained hands sets a little lamp on his stall as dusk takes the street. You smile because you know where the oil comes from. Supply chains are lullabies when they work, and alarms when they don't. The lamp glows and faces tilt toward it. A girl practicing letters at the stall edge licks her finger to turn a page, a gesture that would horrify archivists and delight saints. She looks up once at you. You hope she will someday audit a ledger and balance mercy with vinegar like a professional. By the time you turn back uphill, your pockets are full of quiet contracts. The palace without these people is only polished stone. With them it is a pulse. And Hurrem's legacy beyond the gates isn't a parade of yes men. It's a choreography of competence guilds that keep their oaths, judges who keep their calendars, merchants who keep their scales true, clerics who keep the city's conscience adjustable but intact. Light joke 3, it's like discovering the empire runs on 3 fuels, bread, soap and gossip, and realizing your own apartment basically does too. You pass the sherbet fountain in your memory, and the stamped bread in your hand, and you hear the coffeehouse mutter even with the shutters pulled. The networks have learned her timing: feed, then talk, repair, then scold, schedule, then hope. You breathe with the city, which is the best metric you've collected all night, and you drift back toward the palace, not because it is the source, but because it is the mirror. The outside has taught you what the inside is for, to convert affection into logistics, and logistics into a world where even a dock lamp has a budget line and a midnight. You cross the water without moving because stories sail faster than barges, and by the time dawn touches Venetian shingles, your palace corridors have turned into paragraphs in other people's languages. You hear your own night translated sometimes kindly, sometimes like a funhouse mirror, and you learn the Western name that sticks to Hurrem like a traveling coat. Roxolana, Roxolane, Roxolane, choose your spelling, choose your mood. The mainstream fact steadies you. European envoys and writers from the 16th century onward repeatedly rename her Roxolana, a label that likely grows from Ruthenian Roxolani, a word Westerners used for the lands around Ukraine where she was born. The name becomes a passport. It gets her into plays and pamphlets that never once ask permission at the gate. You step into a Venetian study that smells like ink and wool and a little bit of the sea, and an ambassador bent over his dispatch writes her in as if she were a cabinet minister no one can quite admit exists. His sentences are tidy. His rumour drawer is not. He describes a consort who is married to the Sultan, your steady fact from earlier, who writes letters, who sponsors kitchens, and who, importantly for his readers, proves that the Ottoman court is legible if you learn to read its women. He exaggerates when he needs to be interesting. Envoys are paid in coin and adjectives, and back in the chancery a clerk sands the page and adds a cautious, it is said. That phrase is the transcontinental cousin of your own, a friend told me, and it travels beautifully. You're guided next into a printing shop in Nuremberg, where woodcuts bite the air with resin and ambition. An engraver who has never seen the Bosphorus sets a face into lines he thinks mean sultana, which to him somehow equals high forehead pearl ropes, a lot of confidence, and hair that obeys theology. Copies spread like crumbs for crows. People tack them to walls, paste them in pamphlets, and hold them up in taverns to say, "There, that's her." Historians still argue whether any of these early portraits have direct connection to Hürrem's real appearance, or whether they are composites that satisfy European cravings for a knowable East. You keep your gentle sarcasm holstered, and let the ink have its decade. It will fade where kitchens do not. Across the Alps in Paris, you hear salon talks circle her with a different perfume, less ledger, more allegory. She becomes a fable about female cleverness, warning tale, admiration tale, sometimes both in the same evening. A woman's smile moves empires, someone declares as if he hadn't just also confessed loudly to losing an argument with his laundress. Plays sprout with titles that tuck Suleiman and Roxolane together like a couplet. Operas later on will tune the same pairing, swapping facts for frequencies you can hum on a rainy walk. You don't need to memorize the entire theatre catalogue tonight. Feel instead how a real woman turns into a trope that could walk on any stage and be recognized in 3 steps. The clever favorite, the tender schemer, the consort who writes letters and reads rooms. Stranger paths carry her too. Here's your quirky tidbit: leaf through a 16th century Latin map and watch a big swath of Eastern Europe labeled Roxolania, a scholarly nod to the ancient Roxolani people and by extension Ruthenia. Westerners nudge that label onto the woman in the palace, and presto, Roxolana becomes not just a name but a geography you can point at from a very safe distance. It's linguistic origami and a touch of wishful cartography. Later, when Turquerie fever hits 18th century Paris, you'll see Roxolane sewn onto masquerade costumes and pinned onto perfumes. She is shorthand for silk sherbet, and that imaginary harem where everyone is gorgeous. No one has to mop and doors open with flutes. Light joke 1, you and I know better. Even imaginary harems need someone to refill the lamp oil and tell the cats to stop judging. You lean into a London playhouse and feel the stage work its predictably delicious tricks. Turks are exotic, sultans dramatic, and the harem is a device for testing English virtue without risking English furniture. A Roxolana strides on as temptation or tactician. A Suleiman strides on as thunder wrapped in brocade. Some nights the moral reads, beware the foreign woman's wiles. Other nights it is, beware tyrants who fear wise wives. Either way, your stamped bread and scheduled soup drop out of the script. Practical kindnesses don't usually get monologues and spectacle takes their place. Historians still argue whether European theatre's Roxolana tells us more about Hurrem or about European anxieties over women empire and the delicious terror of a room they can't see. You catch a whiff of Titian in a side gallery, a La Sultana Rossa, red-haired and luminous, that later collectors swear is Roxolana. The red is convincing. The paperwork often isn't. Attribution ricochets through generations like a polite argument at a rich uncle's dinner. The painting works regardless as an icon for a story Europeans have already decided to tell. The East has faces, and one of them is a woman who smiles while she writes policy. You file the image next to the sherbet fountain you loved earlier. Both a theatre, both sweeten something harder beneath. There's a moment in a Vienna salon, hushed, expensive, practically sponsored by Velvet, when a hostess opens a porcelain cabinet and shows off a coffee service painted with crescents and tiny imaginary palaces. Roxolane, she says, tapping a cup as if naming the set confers an anecdote. Guests nod. Someone quotes a translated letter, maybe hers, maybe not, and everyone experiences the soft luxury of feeling informed. It's the 18th century version of scrolling a thread and deciding you already knew. Light joke too. If only someone would stamp these cups like bread, we could tell which claims are real just by weighing them. Meanwhile, pamphleteers and preachers conscript Roxolana for their favorite sermons. She is proof for some that Islam is vulnerable to feminine guile. Proof for others that courts everywhere run on the same human hydraulics: attention, affection, hunger, fear. Printers love her because readers love her. The supply chain of fascination functions much like your old work flows, except the product is opinion. When a border skirmish flares, pamphlets darken her into a witch. When a treaty holds, they polish her into a lady of peace. Historians still argue whether this swingy reception meaningfully shaped policy or just wallpapered it. But you can smell how these images seasoned the European palate for Ottoman news. You notice how the Western Roxolana carries European household debates onto a foreign stage. Should wives advise? Husbands? Should mothers guide? Sons, does mercy make a ruler weak? The supposed East becomes a mirror where the West rehearses its own anxieties with better costumes. You can almost hear a playwright whisper, "This isn't about them," while pointing conspicuously at turbans. And yet tucked in the theatrics, some details ring true, like a coin letters that blend love with policy, endowments that schedule compassion, succession that turns men into weather systems. When those details survive the journey, you feel oddly proud of the postal service. Travel writers add spice. A Frenchman swears he saw Roxolane's bath and describes steam like theology. A Pole insists her kitchens used cinnamon the way his aunt uses, salt aggressively and on everything. Are they embroidering? Yes. Is embroidery a sin when it keeps readers awake by candlelight? Your fan hum says no, and your spoon on copper memory says, just keep the soup hot. Light joke 3 somewhere. A publisher tells a young writer, less accuracy, more adjectives, and a dowry chest across the sea snorts in ledgers. You reach for your favorite callback and find it sent. Europeans try bottling Roxolane as rose amber, as if legacy were a perfume you could wear to a ball. You smile, remembering our scent wardrobe 2 courtyards ago. You forgive the flattery by bottle because at least it aims soft. If people must mythologize, let them do it with soap. And then you take the gentle step of separating myth from malice. Not every Western use of Roxolana is a compliment. Some are poison dipped in curiosity. The Hurrem becomes a word that excuses guessing. Sultana, a mask that justifies erasure. You respond the way the wok did to emergencies, by adding detail until panic loses its appetite. A real woman mothered, built, wrote, scheduled, and laughed. If a pamphlet wants her to be only a whisper that toppled a vizier, that pamphlet can stand in the breadline until it learns to read stamps. All night you've practiced a kind of kindness to sources, believing them enough to learn, doubting them enough to stay awake. Keep that posture now. Historians still argue whether Western portraits of Roxolana ultimately harmed understanding or, oddly, kept her memory alive long enough for better history to catch up. You nod to the argument and step outside where dawn sits on rooftops like a cat you fed once and now think of as yours. The city is quieter than the pamphlets, steadier than the stages and stronger than any engraving. And yet you admit when a tourist stands in the hammam and whispers Roxolana the stones do not bristle. They smile a little, as if to say names are boats. What matters is the bread, the light, the schedule, the seal. You take the softest detour of the night from miniatures the size of your palm to screens the size of living room walls, and you realize the story you've been walking is now bingeable. Episodes spool out like silk music swells where our ledgers used to hum, and Hürrem's laughter lands not on tile but in subtitles you adjust to large because your eyes are loyal but honest. You sit very still and feel a strange loop. A woman who mastered image without coins becomes an image with millions of coins behind it. Cameras, costumes, contracts, streaming rights, and the world, including you in your bed, learns to pronounce names by hearing actors say them first. The mainstream fact places its steady hand on your shoulder so you don't float away. Hurrem dies in 1558 and is buried in a domed tomb in the Suleimaniye complex. Suleiman follows in 1566, and Sinan's stone makes their memory architectural long after ink dries. You hold that anchor while modern waves arrive. A Turkish historical drama splashes onto screens in the 2010 second and turns palace corridors into a global set. Even if you haven't watched, you've watched. The edits, GIFs, and fan audios find you on accident. Clips remix letters into mic drops, robes of honor into runway looks, and our quiet kitchen logistics into plot twists with drum solos. Light joke 1. The algorithm now assumes you favor 16th century intrigue plus cat-friendly lighting, and honestly it's not wrong. You compare the old mirrors to the new. Miniatures made for private albums speak in shorthand emblems patterns, a jawline chosen for allegory rather than bone. HD drama reverses the contract it offers. Pause and breath, and 1,000 choices per minute. How a hand holds a cup, how a smile waits before landing, how a corridor can be a cliff edge. Both forms compress truth. Both are honest about the compression if you listen. Historians still argue whether modern dramatizations dim her administrative legacy in favor of romance, or whether through romance they smuggle her policy instincts to audiences who would never read a wake deed. You inhale and let the debate be a good soundtrack rather than a fight. Streaming gives you geography you didn't expect. A woman in Sao Paulo, a student in Cairo, a nurse in Jakarta, and you, wherever your pillow currently pretends to be a throne, inhale the same scene on different nights. Comments stack like terrace fields. My grandma says the dowry chest scene made her cry. Team letters, team diamonds, please more kitchen shots. The fandom's microeconomy remembers what the archive proves: kindness that runs on schedule is irresistible. When an episode lingers on a soup line or a bathhouse, the chat goes quiet for a second the way a room does when someone lights a candle and everyone pretends they weren't waiting for it. Light joke 2. You have now cried twice at the sight of lentils. We're not judging. The NAR list is. Your timeline learns to make history snackable. 10-second audios carry the cadence of an imperial decree. Edits cut our Justice Tower glances into slow-motion eyebrow phenomenology. Cosplayers stitch tulip borders into jackets and discover how heavy dignity is when it's fully lined. Fan artists paint cats into every scene, insisting correctly that our water dish budget deserves airtime. A quirky tidbit you tuck behind your ear: souvenir shops near Suleimaniye sell bars of Hurrem rose musk soap and boxes of Hurrem locum tinted a brave pomegranate, and tour guides swear the scent is the same as in the old bath. Part truth, part tourism, entirely on brand for a woman whose legacy was always part logistics, part theatre, and part comfortable rumor. But screens do more than sell soap. They pick fights softly. Debates bloom over costumes. Is that embroidery period accurate over language? Would she have said it that way over the tightrope between piety and spectacle? You recognize the old questions in new lighting. How visible is a woman allowed to be? And what does visibility buy for the public besides gossip? Historians still argue whether this global attention rehabilitates her image, emphasizing charity letters and counsel, or whether it re-etches older caricatures, letting Roxolana the schemer masquerade as Hürrem the strategist without admissions at the door. You sit with the discomfort and do what the palace always did: you compare outcomes. Do more people know there was a soup kitchen? Yes. Do more people confuse rumor with record? Also yes. So the work continues. Tourism learns new routes. People step from their hotel vans into the bath we steamed in together, into courtyards where Sinan's geometry still breathes. Some whisper at her tomb, and without damaging anything, leave a single rose petal or a folded paper, wish that no one will catalogue but everyone understands. The gift shops roll their syllables into keychains. The museum placards practice their patient tone. Somewhere a child stares at a stamped bread display and decides kitchens matter because an episode once made them cry at soup. You forgive the genre anything for that alone. You keep your small sarcasm as a seasoning rather than a sauce. When a plot leans into melodrama, you mutter gently, "All right, but did they balance the ledger?" When a villain twirls a mustache that no archive ever mentions, you let the twirl play if and only if the scene also admits the building of a school or the adjustment of a grain price. Your criteria after all these rooms are humble and ruthless. If the bread queue moves, the story may live. If it forgets the bread and remembers only the jewels, it can wait in the lobby until it learns our house rules. Memes being memes find the joy we keep misplacing. One turns our backgammon rumor into a relationship coach date, someone who wagers favors not coins. Another edits sherbet fountains into corporate team-building exercises. Someone designs a Haseki productivity method schedule, kindness audit lanterns, answer letters with both affection and bullet points. It's ridiculous and useful at once, which is a fair summary of living. Light joke 3. You buy the printable and color-code your laundry around the dowry chest line item. Congratulations, you have become the trustee of your sock drawer. Censors and critics pad down the hall in their softest slippers. In some countries, scenes get trimmed. In others, press debates rehearse the old East-West mirror games. A minister frets that romance will weaken respect for law. A columnist counters that law without romance forgets mercy. You sip water and let the fan hum. We've stood in those rooms already. We know what the kitchen does for the courtroom, what the bath does for a bad week, what a letter does for a leader who would otherwise mistake thunder for strength. The most surprising transformation happens in you. The HD close-ups train your eyes to notice hands pouring sherbet, feet pausing before thresholds, scribes sanding ink at exactly the right patience. Your own day begins to behave differently. You stamp your breakfast bread as a joke and discover it tastes like intention. You refill the proverbial cat dish and discover your street calms. You write a message that begins with warmth and ends with a decision, and discover the answer comes back kinder. Screen to habit to city, that is the best spoiler the fandom can deliver. And when someone asks whether the show is accurate, you give the answer. The Waqf trustee, would it balances some months, wobbles others, and needs audits? Historians still argue whether fame is the price or the prize for a life like hers. You shrug in the key of bedtime and say, if the ovens stay hot, call it even. Meanwhile, the actors bow out, the credits roll, and the stone on the hill keeps breathing. The camera leaves, the soup line resumes. That's the test we trust. You lower your phone, let the room darken to a museum of familiar shapes, and hear our night's chorus again: ladle, ledger, letter, lamp. The meme may fade, the edit may age, the algorithm may forget your taste for chamomile intrigue. But tomorrow somewhere, a kid will learn to tie an apron in a kitchen that bears her name, and a visitor will stand under Sinan's dome and whisper without knowing why. Screens helped, stones finish. You drift with that comfort, equal parts pixel and prayer. You sit with your back to a warm wall and discover that what you've really been tracing all night is a syllabus on women and power smuggled into the city as bread baths and letters. The room exhales, your shoulders drop, and you start weighing the ways Hürrem turns allowed into expected. The mainstream fact slips into your palm like a coin you know by touch. In the Ottoman world, women elite and not can own property, bring cases to court and found wax in their own names. Hürrem does it at imperial scale, but the legal grammar is already there. She simply writes in a bolder hand. Property becomes policy. Domestic virtues, feeding, healing, teaching become public infrastructure, and the city learns to hear a woman's seal without flinching. You feel the debate crouching on the cushion beside you, leadership or respectability politics. Is she expanding a lane or staying in it and paving it really well? Kitchens, hospitals, dowries, comfortably feminine domains give her reach that offends no one's grandmother, while quietly rewiring a capital. You remember the double hammam and smile, a bath framed as modesty becomes a sermon on systems design. The lesson isn't radical slogans, it's schedules. Respectability in her hands is a Trojan horse for competence. Light joke 1. If you ever renamed project management as tidying up, congratulations, you've already Hurremed your office. You look down at your mental ledger and see 3 recurring verbs sponsor, advise appear. Sponsor the walks that make mercy punctual. Advise the letters that warm an order until it obeys. Appear the calibrated visibility Garushlook screens, scent wardrobes, Hillat giveaways that turns presents into weather rather than lightning. Each verb has a women's history folded inside. Sponsorship says I can allocate. Advice says I can interpret. Appearance says I can script. Historians still argue whether such power is only palace deep, or whether it meaningfully encouraged urban women to litigate harder, endow more, and expect fairer treatment at the Qadi's bench. You hear the court's soft chorus answer records fill with women's cases and deeds, not because Hürrem invented legality, but because her example made its use feel like a virtue, not a scandal. Role model talk is always risky. Your fan hum reminds you to stay kind. Still, you try on the idea that she becomes a template with knobs you can turn. For pious women, she shows how to turn devotion into durable help lamps that burn loaves that arrive. For political women, she shows how to speak through logistics and live to speak again. For the merely stubborn, which is most of us, she shows how humor can be armor. Remember the backgammon rumor, the teasing verse, the way a smile takes the sharp corner off a necessary no. Light joke 2, necessary no is also what you tell yourself about a third piece of locum. You'll ignore yourself, but you'll say it beautifully. You cross the room to Mirimah and feel a daughter's shoulders take weight. The princess funds mosques, writes letters, and if rumors are to be indulged, becomes the subject of Sinan's poetic geometry. Here's your quirky tidbit. A popular tale claims Sinan aligned 2 Mihrimah mosques so that on the spring equinox, the setting sun and rising moon can be witnessed from special angles at each site. Sun and moon her name. Is it verifiable astronomy or affectionate myth? Historians still argue whether intention or coincidence wears the crown, but the story survives because it fits the era's habit of mixing math with tenderness. And it whispers a second lesson: visibility can be devotional without being decorative. A woman's patronage can teach astronomy to a city that thinks it came for prayer. Outside the palace, the shadow of the template lengthens. Merchant widows use courts to secure inheritance shares. Guild women endow fountains near their stalls. Neighborhood benefactresses pay for lamps and school slates, some naming their waqs after daughters who will never hold office, but will by law hold authority over oil jars. You think of the stamped bread and realize it has cousins: stamped water, stamped light, stamped literacy. Respectability politics, perhaps. But when respectability buys supplies on time, the label matters less than the receipt. Historians still argue whether Hürrem's prominence reinforced a good woman mold that squeezed bolder possibilities, or whether it created a safe on-ramp that thousands drove onto at their own speed. You glance at the traffic and see both SUVs and donkeys. The road is crowded and moving. You turn the jewel of leadership and catch a different glint: diplomacy as etiquette. Hürrem's letters to Sigismund II, Augustus, gracious and practical, become classroom posters for how to ask for what the city needs and make the other party feel clever for agreeing. Modern readers may crave speeches. She prefers paragraphs with softened edges and hard centers, which is either feminine stereotype weaponized or administrative genius wearing perfume. You refuse to choose. Your earlier rule applies: if the ovens stay hot, call it even. Light joke 3, place softened edges and hard centers next to your ideal baklava and congratulate yourself on finally developing a unified theory of pastry and policy. What does the religious conversation do with her? You ease into the madrasa courtyard you visited earlier, where Ibu Suud's harmonizing mind helps the law speak in one voice. In that climate, a woman's endowments seem less like exceptions and more like obedience to the city's best instincts. Preachers use her as example on Fridays, sometimes fairly, sometimes as a prop. In other places and later times, moralists will pull her in opposite directions, saint of charity, siren of intrigue. You've learned the audit method that calms this tug-of-war. Check the schedules. Who got fed? Who learned to read? Who found a bed? The answers may not settle the sermon, but they settle the stomach. You test the story against modern mirrors. A director balancing an NGO budget recognizes her playbook. Immediately diversify. Revenue shops, fields, bath fees, publish impact, stamped bread, lit lamps, manage optics festivals that feed and write to power in a tone that refuses humiliation for either side. A politician in a conservative electorate recognizes the same cloak reform in continuity. Let kitchens preach. Let baths do conflict de-escalation with steam. This is either inspiring or cynical depending on your caffeine level, but results do not apologize. Respectability, that much maligned word, becomes a currency you can spend on upgrades to mercy. Of course there are edges. You don't wrap them in silk. Visibility has a cost. It paints a target. The palace's worst nights, the ones you kept soft, remind you that being audible in a system built to muffle you is both triumph and risk. Some will blame her for storms she did not summon. Others will sanctify her and refuse to admit the breeze she did. Historians still argue whether the Sultanate of Women strengthens state capacity or gradually corrodes the old warrior ethic. You listen to the kitchen's bubble and decide that if corrosion tastes like soup, the city made its choice knowingly. You revisit the cat's dish and the bird palaces, your favorite small mercies, and speak to them because it helps. You are not frivolous, you tell the saucer of water. You teach a neighborhood how to treat breath. Role models are built from these tiny habits, not just from domes. Somewhere a girl watches a woman sign for lamp oil and reads in that signature a permission slip. Be useful, be kind, be exact. If later she must also be visible, she already knows how to appear without turning into a parade. Before you rise, you put one last item in the dowry chest of takeaways. Leadership in her key is a three-part chord competence that can be audited, affection that can be felt, and theatre that can be steered. Tilt anyone too far, and the song sours. Keep them balanced, and your city hums in a register that lets people sleep. That, in the end, is the respectability that matters. Not the costume, but the quiet. Hurrem leaves the costume. It helped, but what she really leaves is the quiet, earned by kitchens that open lamps, that glow letters that land, and courts that remember mercy, is maintenance. You stand, dust the imaginary flower from your hands, and carry the cord with you like a hum you can't shake. Tomorrow, when you send a message that begins warm and ends clear, when you buy extra bread for the neighbor who forgot their wallet, when you schedule your kindness because you finally admit your brain loves calendars, you'll be playing her notes. Not as flattery. A role model doesn't need your praise, but as habit. And habit in her city and yours is the most radical costume of all. You step out where calligraphy becomes skyline, and let the city teach you what survives when names go to sleep. Istanbul first, because stone here keeps a diary, and your feet remember the way to Süleymaniye, that hilltop symphony, where Sinan tuned silence to domes. The mainstream fact steadies your step. Hürrem lies in her own turba within the Süleymaniye complex. She died in 1558, a small luminous drum of tile and light, not far from Suleiman's larger tomb. You don't narrate loudly. You trail a fingertip over glazed arabesques and feel the glaze fingertip you back. Outside, cypress trees point like bookmarks at the sky. A caretaker sweeps with the slow authority of someone who works in centuries, not shifts. Down the hill, the city tilts you toward Haseki, the quarter that wears her title, and the coulier that still threads mosque, school, and imaret into a seam that never quite unpicked itself. The afternoon has the good manners to smell like bread. You look for the stamp we've been following, sometimes present, sometimes just memory, and you find its cousins in the way portions are still imagined as fair, in the reflex that a hungry neighbor is a scheduling problem, not a scandal. At the corner, a cat raises a whisker in recognition because, yes, the dish got filled again. Light joke 1: if Istanbul ever holds elections for most efficient public servant, The cat dish might win on a platform of no speeches, only water. Turn your face to Hagia Sophia, and you can't miss the elegant double hammam that Hurrem endowed across the square, aligned like twin ideas sharing one sentence. Sinan's geometry makes steam feel orderly. Marble under your calves makes patience feel taut. The mainstream fact warms the tiles under your memory. This is Haseki Hürrem Sultan Hammam, a paired men's and women's bath built in the 1552nd, its long axis, a kind of architectural handshake. Attendants still fold towels like origami that intends comfort. A quirky tidbit peeks from restoration lore for years. The hammam was repurposed warehouse carpet bazaar before a restoration returned it to hot breath and humming bowls. Historians still argue whether such restorations recover function or stage it. You shrug kindly in the key of bedtime and say, "If steam softens frazzled nerves, let the staging be merciful." You read the city for policies hiding in plain sight. A baker posts prices a nar echo, if not the original list, because consumers here are trained by deep habit to expect clarity. A grocer tapes a askada ekmek, note suspended bread, a tradition where you pay for an extra loaf. A stranger can claim, which is not Ottoman by law, but Ottoman by mood charity, that pretends to be casual but keeps a ledger behind its back. A muedzin's call lifts across rooftops. You almost hear the percussion of ladles answering. Light joke 2. If you could quantify civic decency per square meter, Istanbul would be a spreadsheet with T rings on it. You follow breath to Jerusalem without noticing when the ferry leaves. Stone changes dialect. Light steps in closer. You walk the old city alleys where Arabic and Turkish once braided daily over the same pot. Hear the endowment that bears her name, Haseki Sultan's Imaret, fed poor and pilgrim for centuries. Its bread trail anchored by a waqf that reached into villages and shops to keep the oven obedient. Mainstream fact kept soft and sturdy. The Imaret operated through the late Ottoman period, a daily choreography of flower fire and the right to be unafraid. Today, the building's roles have shifted, but the lane still remembers the smell of baked mercy. Merchants point with their chins and say there, and their hands perform the old motion of passing a loaf. You stop where a low arch taught whether to behave and listen for a ledger. Even when the kitchen sleeps, its clauses echo: that field pays for this flour, that shop rents for lamp oil. The inspector comes on Thursdays, fines for shaved loaves bite. A nearby fountain talks to your wrists. Its lip is worn like a well-loved psalm. You check your pockets for our favorite small mercies, birdhouses, cat dishes, and yes, Jerusalem has its own cousins, a shelf where pigeons eat without applying for membership, a stoop where someone leaves dates in Ramadan because hunger thrives on excuses but should not. Historians still argue whether the Jerusalem Walk served mostly locals or waves of pilgrims. Your nose votes both and cites the door that kept opening. Walk any farther, and you hit ritual. Not the theatrical kind, though there are lanterns for that too, but the rituals that make a city trustworthy. A boy runs bread to an elder, and never expects coins back. His mother taught him waq before she taught him math. A woman taps a shop door and asks after oil for lamps, not for religion only, but for homework and mending, and the quiet that keeps tempers from borrowing knives. You spot a ledger posted in miniature, a modern NGO note listing meals served, and somewhere deep in your chest a trustee you've become nods impact shared without trumpet. Light joke 3, you resist the urge to stamp the PDF bread approved and settle for a generous donation instead. Back to Istanbul because cities speak in call and response. A ferry cuts like a quill across the Bosphorus and you stand at the rail, feeling history insist on cross-drafts. Üsküdar lifts its mosques like lanterns. One belongs to Miramar, your sharp, luminous callback, and you entertain the affectionate rumor that equinox, sun and moon perform choreography here. Whether engineered or embraced after the fact, the story proves what we keep learning: people like to weave astronomy into affection, and cities like to humor them. You grin at the thought of Sinan smiling in his beard. The bazaars echo with your earlier sections in lowercase. A spice seller's scoop is a ladle with more perfume. A porter's strap squeaks like a bath bowl. The ethics of measure scales, true loaves, whole live here as muscle memory. Tour groups flock to soap stamped with Hürrem's name. You smile and think of the bath's old fog and the new suds in hotel showers. The souvenir might be kitsch. The instinct underneath is not to take home the smell of a city that once washed you kindly. You practice our audit trick whenever you feel lost. Ask who gets fed, who reads by what light, and who can petition whom, without being scolded into silence. In both cities, the answers wobble. History is a drunk table sometimes, but the plate, the lamp, the bench survive as categories everyone recognizes. Historians still argue whether these survivals are the residue of imperial design or the unstoppable talent of ordinary people to keep each other intact. You concede the argument its charm and choose the both, and that has become your lullaby. A guide points out tiny carved bird palaces on an Ottoman facade, dollhouse mansions for sparrows, and the alley warms with grins. Quirky, yes, but also a policy in miniature. If you tend to small breath, big breath behaves. That's why you keep circling the cat dish and the stamped bread like touchstones. They are municipal philosophy you can pour. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, a shopkeeper rubs an old brass stamp between thumb and forefinger and says his grandfather used to mark charity loaves with it. He doesn't know where the bread went, only that the mark meant someone remembered someone, that someone is how cities live. You pass a Ramadan drummer practicing the pre-dawn beat on a quiet afternoon, muffled by a folded blanket, so the neighbors don't mistake rehearsal for 3 a.m. You laugh softly because this is our night in one gesture, kindness rehearsed, then performed right on time. You remember the Justice Tower's slow blink, the coffeehouse's low murmur, the ferry's wet comma at the end of a sentence, and you feel how the stones you've touched are less monument than metronome. The beat is older than any one patron. Hurrem simply wrote a part that made the whole easier to keep. When evening slides down the tiles like honey, you find yourself outside a bakery where sesame halos simit line up like well-behaved moons. A girl reaches, hesitates, then picks the smaller ring because the bigger one looks too proud. You pay for both and tell her to pass the extra to the next hand that looks unsure. She does. That's your walk tonight, and it costs less than a speech. Cities endure on gestures like that, scaled up by law and stamped by habit, until even rumor learns to say please. You head home, whatever home means in a story this wide, with your wrists still cool from fountain water and your shoulder still remembering the towel's weight. The stones will be here tomorrow, and the kitchens and the birds that lord over roofs like unpaid landlords. Your job now is simple. Keep the audit alive. When you see stamped bread, think schedule. When you see a lamp, think ledger. When you smell steam, think systems. When you laugh in a hard room, think backgammon. Cities are the way we practice being together without breaking. She left you scaffolding for that. You can climb it gently. You sit in the corridor where stories queue up like petitioners, and you start sorting bread from rumor tile from tinsel, because you've earned a gentle audit. You pick up each shiny claim and ask our favorite sleepy questions. Did anyone eat because of this? Did any lamp burn longer? Did any letter change a decision? The mainstream fact that keeps your hand steady: Hürrem's tomb stands in the prime. Suleiman Complex 1558. Her work deeds survive in court registers and several letters in her name to Suleiman and to Sigismund II. Augustus are copied in chancery books. Those are stones, bread, and ink you can touch. Around them, of course, fog collects the funhouse mirrors of Roxolana, the stage directions of later theatre, the high-drama edits of television nights that taught you to pronounce Haseki between sips of tea. You hold the big controversies up to the lamplight and let them tell you who they are. Ibrahim Pasha's fall, Mustafa's death, Bayezid's rebellion and desperate flight. Historians still argue whether Hurrem actively engineered those storms or whether she became the era's lightning rod, credited when mercy prevailed, blamed when fear did. You recognize the pattern from your own group chats. The person who actually answers emails gets both the thank yous and the daggers. Your rule doesn't change with brocade. Check the schedules. If kitchens kept running, if prices held, if petitions found softer landings, then somebody was winning arguments in rooms without minutes. Myth management becomes part of your bedtime hygiene. When a pamphlet or a plot insists she bewitched rather than budgeted, you move it to the theatre shelf and continue cooking. When a caption calls her schemer, you cross-reference with the soup spoon and the dowry chest. If the insult can't explain stamped bread, it has to wait at the door. Light joke 1. The door has a tiny bell, the courier's bell again. So slander at least arrives with courteous jingles. When flattery hyperventilates saint of mercy, mother of an age, you still open the ledger. Saints who miss payrolls are just pretty excuses. You keep one eye on the mirrors in which other people practice their own anxieties. European prince that renamed her Roxolana taught Paris and London what they wanted the East to be, a cautionary tale about women talking politics in comfortable rooms. Modern dramas risk a different simplification, upgrading every eyebrow to a policy. Your kind sarcasm should be greenlit here. The Justice Tower needed clerks more than cheekbones. Yet you also admit the upside screens smuggled soup lines into living rooms. Kids asked why bread was stamped. Viewers sniffed rose musk soap and learned the word waqf. The myth carried a grocery list in its purse. You let yourself enjoy a few offbeat crumbs because joy makes memory obedient. A quirky tidbit you've collected from docents and aunties: some visitors leave a single pomegranate seed by Hürrem's turbe for sweetness multiplied. Is that a 16th century practice? Probably not. Is it an honest echo of kitchens that multiplied sweetness into safety? It is close enough to keep. Another guides swear the hammam's attendants used to judge a man's character by how he folded his towel. There's no court record for that, obviously, but the instinct is Ottoman competency first, then incense. Now you translate legacy into a checklist for your own day. No robes of honor required. Schedule kindness. That's the thesis. If a good deed depends on your mood, it will starve. If it depends on your calendar, it will eat. Audit the tiny mercies: lamp oil, a person's evening dowries, a person's start-bird palaces and cat dishes, a neighborhood's breath. Write letters that begin warm and end clear. Praise first, then the point, then the plan. Appear wisely. Some days your work is a silhouette behind a screen. Some days your presence needs sleeves and a route. Build for boredom. If your project only works when you feel epic, it doesn't work. Light joke 2. Name your to-do list wak, so you're legally obliged to fund it with snacks. Practice the palace's tone. Mercy as maintenance law, as clock theatre, as thermostat. When anger wants a spectacle, give it a schedule. When pride wants a headline, give it a spreadsheet. When fatigue wants to hide, give it a bench in the hammam for 10 minutes and a glass of water for the cats on the way home. Historians still argue whether the Sultanate of Women strengthened a weary machine or signaled its decline. Your phone politely buzzing suggests a simpler, more actionable article of faith. Families, teams, cities, yours included. To improve, when people who aren't supposed to hold the seal are trusted with lamp oil and ledgers. Keep your little museum of callbacks and let them tutor you when the day frays. The backgammon board: trade coin for favors, status for service. Win by leaving the room kinder than you found it. The sherbet fountain: sweeten policy just enough that people remember why obeying it feels like dignity. The NAR list: name fair prices in money, time, attention, and post them where everyone can see. The coffee house: recognize that once people learn to sit and talk, information grows legs. Govern for that reality. Light joke 3. When a meeting spirals, slide in a stamped simit and say, "We're auditing emotions. Please price your grievances." You leave one last soft verdict under the Justice Tower's nightlight. She did not invent kindness any more than Sinan invented gravity, but she standardized it and published the pattern. Mercy acquired a payroll. Affection learned bullet points. Law kept a drawer labeled repair. That's what you inherit, whether or not you inherit an empire. The habit of feeding problems until they become neighbors. The reflex to pour water for small breath because big breath behaves when small breath is seen. The discipline to turn admiration into infrastructure. When someone tries to sell you a myth that doesn't feed anyone, you know where the kitchen is. You stand, stretch, and do the only test that matters: breathe with the city. If your breath evens out, if your shoulders drop like shutters at dusk, if your mind can hum the 3-part chord: competence, affection, theater, then you did the audit right. You can sleep now. The stamped bread will still mean proof in the morning. The lamp will still mean ledger. The cat laureled in smugness will still mean don't forget the dish. Word count 1096. The room dims by degrees the way courtyards quiet after the last ladle knocks the pot. Your breaths lengthen, syllables soften. The city we've walked starts folding itself back into a small patient bundle and tucks into the corner like a well-trained cat. You're not leaving anything undone. The kitchens have their schedules, the lamps, their oil, the letters, their routes, the tiles, their slow, cool glow. There's nothing here that needs you to hurry. Even the Justice Tower, that sleepless elder, blinks more slowly now, a lighthouse convinced the shoreline can look after itself for a while. You let the familiar shapes drift across your thoughts, bread stamped with a promise. A fountain that tastes like metal and moon. A towel warm against your shoulders. A line of domes counting the beats of your heart. Names and debates grow lighter, as if the ink itself decided to rest. You feel how kindly systems cradle people when the people who built them remembered softness, dowries folded into cedar soup, arriving at the same hour, a clerk's careful hand turning a tense day into a receipted one. The world is still big, the night is still wide, but your corner of it is small enough to be held by the old rhythms we've rehearsed. If a worry remains at your door, treat it like those early coffeehouse murmurs, let it talk itself tired, while you rinse your hands and set out a little water for whatever breath shares your street. You don't need loud answers. You need steady ones, and you have them. You can write a warm line and a clear line. You can put kindness on your calendar. You can step out of sight without stepping away. And you can sleep because the city inside you now knows how to tend its lamps and its ledgers and its laughter without starting a fire. So we'll leave one light low, not as an alarm but as a welcome, and we'll let the rest of the room go velvet. If you listen, you will hear only the fan, and behind it, the tiniest procession, a ladle placed on a hook, a seal pressed into wax, a cat settling into exactly the same spot it chose yesterday. That's all the ceremony you need. Let your jaw unclench, let your eyes close, let the domes breathe for you a little while. Sleep is just a gentle walk, a gift that renews itself. Take it, keep it, and wake when you're ready.